Okay, welcome everybody to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, June the 8th, 2022. It is very hard to believe that this is our last committee meeting of the year. I'll wait to say we made it at the end of the meeting, but for now, welcome to it. What an interesting and exciting year it's been. So I'll call this meeting to order, and just in terms of a roll call, we have regrets from Trustee Gray, from Jean, and I believe Amy will also not be joining us this evening unless she gets connectivity, and Kelly and Joanna will be joining us ASAP. Okay, we don't have a private session tonight. So that I know of anyways. So we'll move to item 1.3 then, acknowledgement of traditional lands. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawadarand, the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions, land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Donna. And there are a number of trustees that are on the road, either traveling as we go through the meeting or not in their home offices at the moment, myself included. So we'll do the very best that we can, and certainly appreciate your dedication for jumping in from wherever you may be. Okay, so we'll go to 1.4 then, which is approval of the agenda. I just want to say that 3.1 is Halton Learning Foundation, although it is also a leadership foundation as well, certainly for HDSB. So that's just a little correction there under 3.1. Other than that, would somebody like to make a motion to approve that? Thanks a lot, Leah. Is there any discussion or debate? Okay, any opposition to approving this agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll approve the agenda by unanimous consent then, and move on to the consent agenda, which is comprised of the minutes from our meeting May 11, 2022, and that is attached to the agenda. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve? Thanks very much, Tanya. Is there any discussion, debate, edits, revisions? Okay, any opposition to approving those minutes then? As received, seeing no opposition, then we'll approve those also by unanimous consent. And we'll move into items under 3.0, the presentation items. And I do want to welcome both Leslie Mansfield from Halton Learning Foundation and Jillian Tukatarna. So we have some awesome guests for these first two items. So welcome to you both, and over to you, Leslie.
Thank you very much, Trustee L. Harrison, and I'd like to send my thanks as well to the board for inviting Halton Learning Foundation this evening. With your permission, I will be sharing my screen. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Halton Learning Foundation, though I would imagine many of you are, we are a registered charity that supports the Halton District School Board, and we've been around for almost 20 years. Our sole mandate is to raise money to support the students and the schools of the Halton District School Board. And our mission is to ensure that no child is left behind, to make sure that we level the playing field for all HDSB students. I'm going to take you through 3 items today, and I know I have 8 minutes, so I've just pressed my start timer so I don't go over time right now. We have our school grants, or our engagement funds, our scholarships, and our core program, which is our eliminating barriers. And our school grants provide programs and resources beyond provincial funding provided by the Ministry of Education. The scholarships are for our graduating students for college, university, and apprenticeships. And of course, our Eliminating Barriers Fund provides emergency funds and subsidies to children who are living at or below the poverty line. And there's about 10% in Halton to fully engage them in learning. I am very pleased to share a little bit about our school grants. In a typical year, HLF disperses about 100 grants to HDSB schools. This year, we provided $168,000 for 124 projects across 64 schools. Every project that a school requested funding for was approved. And I'd like to specifically mention RBC Foundation for their enormous support in mental health granting for schools. They provide $60,000 this year for all the mental health grants that were awarded to schools. Our grant stream reflects the HDSB's strategic plan. So projects that were approved this year were in the 4 streams that you'll be very familiar with: equity and inclusion, mental and physical health, well-being, arts and music, and Indigenous awareness. 58 of the 124 projects were to support mental health and well-being. And the feedback we've received from teachers and principals about how these funds are helping students has been absolutely tremendous. Our scholarships are funded from donors in the community, and these are a significant source of both financial and moral support for graduating students, especially those who are in lower income circumstances. And this month, 78 HDSB graduating students were the recipients of HLF scholarships worth over $150,000. And that number continues to grow every year thanks to donors in our community who say, I would like to set up a scholarship in honor of someone who's near and dear to me. HLF now also has 4 scholarships worth over $20,000 across 4 years, which are aimed at students who have real financial need. And these awards make a significant difference for students and their families. Eliminating barriers. I know you've heard of that before, and I know you know the difference that this makes to students in our communities. And we are doing our very best to get the word out to HDSB staff and the broader community that we want to increase the number of kids who receive funding from HLF, because we know that there are more students and families who could use our help to keep kids engaged, keep them in school while dealing with an emergency financial barrier. It has been growing very quickly over the last 3 weeks or so, and it's been growing over the last several years. With the exception of last year, it was lower, but of course, there was so much virtual learning. It was very difficult for principals, teachers, secretaries to be able to identify those students. We had requests. We are beginning to approach our high back from 2019, 2020 with 1,350 requests so far for schools. But I imagine that in these last 3 weeks of schools, we are going to surpass 2019, 2020 and be inching up towards 1,500 students. The good thing about this is we still have the capacity to continue saying yes, but we always are looking for additional funding, because I don't want that day to come when we have to decline a request. I won't let that happen. Our impact this year is on the screen. I'm not going to read it to you, but I do want to share a story that happened with a school that HLF provided a school grant for in the amount of $1,500. And it was for the school to go on a trip to Mountsburg, and it was Mountsburg Conservation Area. And there was one little boy in grade 4, and his name is Jack. And he's never been on a school bus before, and he had never gone on a school trip before. And he was so excited to just get on the bus. He didn't care where it was going. It was a school bus, and he was part of the experience, because with his socioeconomic situation, he only went to school and up to his apartment building to see his mom and then back to school. When he got to school the next day, he said to his teacher, "You'll never guess what I saw today. I saw an owl, and I ate maple syrup. And if you take a look at that $1,500 for the entire school to go on that trip, that may have worked out to $13 or $14 a child. And to have that experience be shared with someone like Jack was enormous and incredibly fulfilling. And it certainly brought a bit of a tear to my eye when I read that story. I now have 2 minutes and 34 seconds. And be respectful of your time, I will end my remarks tonight by saying thank you to all of those who support HLF, whether it's one time, whether it's as a monthly donor, whether it's through a scholarship, or whether you just feel like giving because it's our back to school campaign or our holiday campaign. We really appreciate this. We're trying to reach our goal of $1 million, and we're only about 70,000 short of that. And I am very, very grateful to all of you who've been helping out HLF. Thank you.
I'm speechless. Just let that percolate and sink in for a second. This is amazing. Such needed work that's being done, Leslie, by you and your staff. And for me, it's those stories that bring it all home, because I'm not in the classroom myself, and that's a beautiful thing. I will open the floor for any questions, comments from the trustee team. I want to acknowledge that Kelly Amos is in the room with us now. And Curtis, you jumped on. Would you like to say something?
I just want to publicly acknowledge the great work of HLF in all of our schools. Certainly, when I go to schools, almost inevitably, someone will share with me the great support that they're receiving from HLF. So they're doing a fantastic job, and I couldn't support them any more than I do right now, because they're invaluable to us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, well, I have a question, and that is, Leslie, since the pandemic's happened, HLF, among, other organizations and so on, have really had to find new ways and new approaches to do the good work and continue the good work. And I wonder, what's been the most kind of successful initiative, and what are you thinking moving forward? And then lastly, just if each trustee could do one thing, what would that be?
I will share that the two most impactful things that we've done during the pandemic, it was the Cogeco Give 5 Challenge that happened in May of 2020, our very first virtual event that we did, an enormous success. And of course, our Students in the Spotlight that ran in April of this year, garnering over 200 videos for a spot of only 22. And the enormous response from the young people and from the schools and from the parents and the teachers was enormous, to the fact that we actually had people saying, are you planning on doing this again next year? When is it going to be happening again this year? And that was something brand new that we had done. So that was very exciting. You asked me a second question, but I'll answer your third one because I remember that the most, which is what the trustees can do. I appreciate greatly every time that you share a Twitter message from us, that you share a Facebook message. If you have the ability to be able to support HLF before the end of our fiscal year in August, that would be wonderful. That'd be wonderful. Or you might be able to advocate on behalf of us. As you know, the HDSB is the only organization that we look at in terms of funding. We have blinders on. We don't support anyone else but the students in the schools of the Halton District School Board. But I appreciate every time you retweet, you ping, you text, you all that. But we are looking for that little bit more just to get over this hump. And I know we're going to make it because I'm an optimist. So I'm already proud of the fact that I know we're going to pass the finish line. And Trustee L. Harrison, I didn't remember your second question you asked me.
It was just, I guess, the forward-looking piece. You reflected on the new stuff that's happened, and then, what are your thoughts for this next kind of chunk?
We have a strat planning session coming up in early September, and we're going to be looking at the amount per student that we give. We're going to be taking a look at that to see if we need to modify the parameters around those dollars. And it's going to be something that's going to be a very interesting conversation because, of course, $250 for a child, it helps temporarily. We always honor second requests for students, which can also help. But will there be ways that perhaps we can expand those parameters? I'm not sure, but I'm going to be very excited going into this strat planning session in September to take a look at that and see what else we can do to help young people and also connect more with the charities that are also connected. For example, Home Sweet Hope. I made a presentation to them about how their participants in their program can also receive support from Halt Learning Foundation. Of course, Halton Women's Place, the different food agencies. So broadening our awareness, broadening our reach, and always getting out there and hustling and being in our cars and just knocking on doors saying, here's what we do and how can you help?
Okay, sounds like a really great opportunity to, do some strategic thinking on next steps, and that's amazing.
It'll be wonderful. So thank you very much for the invitation here tonight, Trustee L. Harrison and Associate Director Bogue and Director Ennis. I know it's your last meeting and I've taken way too much of your 8 minutes. So I'll say good night now. Enjoy the rest of your meeting. And I hope you have a wonderful summer. Thank you very, very much, everyone.
Hey, thank you. If I had a hat,
and I'm always around. If you want to send me a note, I'm always around. Thanks very much. Bye.
Take care. Bye. Bye, Leslie. Okay, that's great. And so when you're asking or talking too much, when the guest does the facilitating. So I promise we'll jump back into the agenda here. And our second topic is the bylaw update and legal opinion. Jillian Tuck-Katarn is here, and with respect to the work that's been done by the governance group, Tanya, I'm wondering if do you want to facilitate this section, or do you want to say maybe start off, or also I just want to recognize that Jean Carrillo, our new wonderful manager, has been involved in this piece as well. So Jean or Tanya, did you want to say anything? Introductory comments or anything?
I can say a few comments. So just want to say thank you to Jillian for reviewing and providing a detailed report. I learn every time we get something from Jillian. I always learn something new. So and reading the memorandum she sent out, there are definitely changes that do need to be made to the bylaw. So I look forward to hearing anything Jillian would like to add to the report, or even open the floor to trustees who may have questions or are looking for additional clarity. But I'll leave it to you, Tracy, to facilitate the session. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. Sounds good. And so then, Jillian, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm really here at the request of the board to answer questions. I did, as Tanya said, put everything I could find as an observation into the memo. I had the advantage of having fresh eyes. It's always easier to edit things that other people have written than to start yourself. If I had sent you the draft, there would have been probably just as many edits that you would have found of things that didn't fit with your lived experience, can we call it that, with the bylaw. So it has to be the end product has to be a combination of what suits you all, because you work with the document every day, and then I was asked to review it from the lens of making sure that you hadn't taken out or added anything that didn't align with the Education Act. And you had you adopt Robert's rules, so that was my other filter that I use. So that was mainly it. I think I was able to identify a couple of things that might have come out from the existing bylaw that perhaps seemed like editing for with the viewpoint of making it more streamlined. But I said, this is no, you got to put that back. That was there for a reason. In a couple of other instances, some things were added, and just as a general comment, I would say that there's always caution when you're drafting a legal document that you don't say something in two places if you can possibly avoid it, because the odds are you're going to say it a different way the second time, and then you've got two different things saying the same thing, and two different people can read it two different ways or four different ways. And so where you can not repeat yourself, it's always going to be safer. So pick one place, put it in, do your best, have your best crack at it, and stick with that. So that was the background to a couple of the comments where I said that something was either repetitive or redundant. Sounds like such a hard word, but it was with that lens to say don't say it twice if you can avoid it. And similarly, it's always there's always jeopardy in trying to rephrase what's in your case in the Education Act, even though that language can be cumbersome, and you always think you could probably say it a little more easily and in a more user-friendly way. But as soon as you start paraphrasing, chances are you're gonna mess with it a little bit. That's going to make your life more difficult later on. So where you can either refer directly to a section of the Act, or you can cut and paste it and put it right into your document. That's a better route to go, I would suggest. And then I think I made a comment about the definitions. You'd place them in a separate document, and I invited the board to think about that, just because it's pretty handy to have everything you need in one document, but also some of the definitions you're going to use are going to be particular to the bylaw. Again, the caution would be not to use one definition in the bylaw and then define the same term differently somewhere else. But there may be some advantage to having it right in the document. It's entirely up to you. It's not a legal requirement. It's more a comment in terms of whether or not it makes it the document more user-friendly for you. But again, when you define something, don't use a definition that's different from the Act or one of the regulations made under the Act. But the drafting convention would say that, as I outlined in my memo, that where you define a term, you can refer to it throughout the document by capitalizing it, even though it's in the middle of a sentence. And that tells the reader, go back to the definition, because I don't want to repeat the definition every time I use the term. Or you can take a lengthy phrase and shorten it to one word. And then as long as you capitalize it everywhere, that says I'm adopting the definition that I set out at the beginning. So it can certainly make your document read better and flow better. So that would be the only purpose. And I guess ultimately the question would be for trustees, do you want to have if you're putting the definitions into the bylaw or attaching them as an appendices, if that's better, is the goal to end up with one document that everybody can have access to at your meetings, and everything you need is in one place. But that's the choice of the user. It's not a requirement. So those are just some observations, and other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the comments I provided.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you very much. It's kind of ironic, wasn't it? Just over 10 years ago, you were writing these bylaws when you were a trustee. We've come a long way since that. Jillian, thank you so much. I'm going through all of your different notes, and a lot of it's making sense. I wonder if you can touch base on the notion of trustees at the beginning of meetings approving trustee absences. Because I'm trying to read. I've got my big iPad and my little iPad. I'm trying to read everything on the little iPad, and my eyes aren't quite as old as they used to be, and I don't speak legalese as well as I used to. So I just wonder if you could comment on that for us.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Donna. I think it's probably important to globally look at why there's a provision in the Act that allows trustees to approve an exemption in the first place. Because there's a straightforward rule that says if you miss 3 meetings in a row, you're deemed to have resigned. And we now have a regulation that says you can attend electronically. But in any event, I think we can look at the purpose of that section and say, if you've run for office and then you just stop coming to the extent that you missed 3 in a row, then you're deemed to resign, because the people in your area are entitled to have somebody in the job that's gonna show up. So, however, I think the exemption to that, which says that you can seek the approval of the Board of Trustees, is really there to recognize that there may be special circumstances. And it's not because, well, this would apply before we could attend electronically, but you sometimes hear about people asking for an exemption because they like to go to Florida in the winter. So it's not really meant for that. It's meant to say if you have an illness or some extraordinary event in your life that prevents you from attending, and people sometimes interpret that as meaning attending and being able to usefully participate. So you can think of the kind of range of circumstances, but I'll use illness as the most obvious example. But you foresee that you'll be able to return to full participation in the future. You might come to your fellow trustees and say, I wish to be exempted from this provision that would say that I'm deemed to have resigned because I'm going to miss 3 meetings because I'm unwell, but I anticipate being able to come back. So in that context, I would say that that's not a meeting by meeting exemption. It's a cumulative exemption. I think the difficulty with saying that you're going to ask, or you're going to, as a board, consider approving individual absences is a stretch, because it suggests that a trustee doesn't have the right, without providing any kind of explanation, from being absent. And you do have that right. You have the right to miss a meeting without explaining to anybody why you've missed. And you have a right to miss 2 meetings in a row without explaining to anybody why you've missed. And so to suggest that the board's going to approve every time somebody's gone, I think is taking an authority that the board doesn't actually have. It's only in this circumstance where a person is going to miss 3 in a row and wants to be exempted that the board has any role at all under the statute. So that's my view, is that it's an overextension of the authority that you have under the Act.
Thank you for that clarification.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, so further to that, the language that was in the bylaw that you reviewed is language that we've had for since the last review. We didn't change any language this time around. So how are we to properly apply the approval of a trustee's absence? Is it the 3rd time that they're absent? I'm just trying to put that rule into practice. How would it work? I'm sick 1 time, I'm sick a 2nd time. If I'm going to be sick a 3rd time, do I, as the sick trustee, say, please approve my absence? Or is it up to another trustee to make a motion to approve my absence? I'm just trying to figure out logistically how that works.
It's on the request, Tanya, of the trustee who's going to be absent, and you're not really asking for approval of your absence. You can be absent if you want. You're asking for approval of the application of the deemed resignation. So you're really asking to be exempted from the deemed resignation under that section of the Act. And there may be circumstances where the board denies the request. And there may be circumstances where the person doesn't ask, in which case the deemed resignation takes effect without anybody interfering with it. And I wouldn't suggest that it's the place of another trustee to ask that a fellow trustee be exempted. I would think, reading the Act, that the person requesting the exemption has to make the request and then explain a rationale. Otherwise, I think you have the right to, not to be flippant about it, but to come and go as you see fit. It's your job. You applied for it when you ran, and you have the responsibility of meeting the duties of the office. And so I know everybody takes that really seriously, and you're not accountable to one another for an absence on occasion. So I would say, to answer your question in practical terms, you might you can simply state that the board will consider a request for an exemption on application by a trustee.
Okay, it's almost like we need to snip out this portion of the meeting as a reminder on this, because it feels like this has been the single biggest circular discussion that we've all had. And of course, everybody's making good points that they completely believe to be correct.
I'm sorry, Tracy. I meant to say one more thing in response to Tanya. May I just, sorry,
Yes.
I missed a point. Tanya, you asked, would that be before or during or after? And I think it depends. A person might anticipate that they're going to miss 3 meetings in a row. I could think of an example in another board where a trustee knew they were going to be undergoing chemo and they just knew they weren't going to be there for 3 months. In other instances, you might get to 2 thinking you're fine, you're not going to miss the 3rd, but then you have to. You might have missed 3 and you know, then you might after the 3rd ask for an exemption. So I don't know if you can always anticipate, and it would depend on the circumstances. It's at the board's discretion in any case. So you have a little bit of latitude there where I don't think you want to put a deadline on the application, but at some point the board would recognize the position had been abandoned and would have the right under that section of the act to run a by-election or appoint somebody. Sorry, thank you, Tracy. I meant to say that earlier. I forgot.
No problem. I was trying to help out there, just buy some time for those things to happen. So go ahead there, Margot. You're up.
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me? Yep, awesome. Okay, so I'm just checking, Jillian, because again, I do wonder with this piece, is it? So when it comes to the 3 missed meetings, would that not be a discussion that would be had amongst the trustees to say, listen, we know they're going through, you know, as you said, it's that exemption from, but it would be a discussion, would it not? Like, it's not like I don't see it as an automatic, you miss 3 and you're gone. I see it as if you miss 3, it's then, okay, so let's take a look at this and see, is that exemption, like, does it have to be a request from the trustee, or could it be a discussion at the table?
Well, I'm going to call up the exact wording of the act if you'll give me a minute, because I read the act as saying you are deemed to have resigned if you miss 3 readings in a row. That's the starting point. And now, and then we look at, are there any exceptions to that? Yes, there's one. You can ask your fellow trustees to exempt you from that deemed resignation. They can save you from it. We could say it that way. I'm just going to find that section of the act for you, and we can look at the exact wording. So anyway, that's my interpretation of the act. And I think we got to be cautious here about 2 things. One would be for the board not to exceed its authority and give itself the right to approve things that the act doesn't give it the right to vote on. But the second would be just to be cautious around people's privacy. You know, if I miss a meeting and I don't want to explain to everybody else why I've missed, because for personal reasons, I'm not under any obligation, and nor am I under obligation to explain why I've missed a 2nd meeting. And I don't have to explain the 3rd if I don't mind resigning from my job. If I'm not comfortable with the resignation and I think I have circumstances I'm prepared to share with the board in order to ask the board to consider that exemption, then that's up to me to bring that forward. But other than that, I think you want to be careful you don't wade too much into people's that matters.
Right, and that's sort of, that was my idea. Like, I recognize that it would be I don't know. Yes, okay, thank you. I want to say thank you.
All right, Andrea, go ahead.
Hi, Jillian. I was just thinking that, you know, if the whole 3rd meeting thing is of a personal matter and the person is looking for an exemption and perhaps needs to have a discussion, that definitely could fall under a private session because it is a personal matter, right? So this doesn't have to be a public conversation, though the waiving of or the exemption vote would probably have to happen in public, correct?
Yes. So I'll read out, if I can, Tracy, the wording of the act. It's section 228, and it said a member of a board vacates their seat if he or she absents himself or herself without being authorized authorized by resolution entered in the minutes from 3 consecutive regular meetings of the board. So for this board to interpret that as being 1 consecutive meeting is, I think, not inconsistent with the wording of this section.
Okay, thank you. There are no other yes, there are. Go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, a question for you. In one of your comments on page 1, you had made a suggestion to perhaps call this document governance bylaw as opposed to, let me not put words in your mouth. Let me read what you said. The board may wish to include a subheading to the title of the document, such as operational bylaw or governance bylaw. So to me, this is definitely a governance bylaw. I'm wondering, could you give an example of what would fall under an operational bylaw?
Probably, Tanya, we would want to add one more word to that term, operational. For example, governance operations or something. It really is, as you're identifying, I think this is the bylaw that relates to how the board does its decision-making process. It's the business of the board. I think we just want to distinguish that from your, you may have other bylaws, borrowing bylaws. Some organizations have. You have other bylaws, don't you? That come from administration. No, you don't. Okay.
Yeah, and I
You
guess
have educational charge bylaws.
Sorry.
There aren't. Don't you have educational development charge bylaws, or am I dating myself? That's not. You don't have those.
We do have those. Yes.
Okay, so I think I just made
You give me an example.
Call this something else.
Okay.
It needs to just say that this is the Board of Trustees bylaw, right? This is your decision-making document.
Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you very much. Just a question around this, and I know that this has come from the proposals of the board's policy, bylaw, and governance committee, and something came up a few weeks ago, and I'm wondering if I can ask you about it. We were looking at creating a school naming committee, which would be around a policy, and so we're back and forth as to whether or not that sort of ad hoc committee is in the property of the board and as such the chair, or the property of the policy committee. Who has that authority to pull those committees together when it is to do with something like a school renaming policy? So we had a lot of muddiness around that, and I wondered if you could offer any clarity.
Yes. All committees, in my view, report to the Board of Trustees, and only the Board of Trustees has the authority to strike a committee. Now, a committee of the board may strike a subcommittee. That would be up to this board to decide whether or not that would lie within the realm of responsibility of its committees, because you own each and every committee. So committees of themselves don't have any decision-making authority. We're talking now about your, not necessarily your statutory committee, but the committees you create, whether ad hoc or standing. And all of those committees should not be making any decisions. They should only be making recommendations to the Board of Trustees. So you might get a recommendation from the governance committee that they want to create a subcommittee. I'm not sure whether school naming would fall as a subcommittee of your governance committee, but that would be up for this board to decide. But in any case, there shouldn't be any decisions that are made outside of the congregation of this group sitting as a board. Does that answer your question? I don't know if that's the muddiness, but
it actually does. It very clears it up quite a bit. Thank you very much, Jillian.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have a board committee, policy and procedure that are also being reviewed at this point in time. Is that correct? Manager Carrillo and Tanya, Jean and Tanya, Committee of the Whole, first names.
Sorry, could you repeat which policy you're asking about?
I'm asking about the committees one.
Yes, there is a committee's policy and appointments governance procedure that has been received by the board and forwarded for legal review. So it has not yet been adopted.
That's right. So I'm just alerting people that there's also that other kind of process that's taking place at this moment in time or in the near future. So we'll also get to talk about that in that context. And certainly it's been an evolution, hasn't it? From 2014 to now, we had a committee structure, and then we went to Committee of the Whole, a different structure, and now we're doing both. So it'll be interest in creating them along the way. So it'll be interesting to see how that governance procedure also works out. Tanya, go ahead. And that was just in response to Donna's question that we may be talking about that piece again in the nearish future. And some other people had questions in that regard as well. Go ahead, Tanya.
Okay. This question I think it's more for us as trustees than it is for Jillian. But right now, one of our policies is about reviewing policies every 3 years. And when this revision of the bylaw came out, we also suggested to take a peek at it every 3 years. And I'm thinking, seeing as how our term is 4 years, what is the appetite of the board to go from 3 to 4 years? So instead of reviewing every 3 years, to maybe change that to every 4. And so that in your term of 4 years, we're looking at each policy just once versus potentially some policies we'd be looking at it twice.
I see some nodding. I see lots of squares with no faces. Also, go ahead, Andrea. And then Jean, did you pop in to say something as well? No? Okay, go ahead, Andrea.
I was just wondering if we knew, like in other places, what their cycle is. It does seem like a pretty tight cycle of 3 years. But I think it also depends on the policies themselves, because some of the topics might lend themselves to needing a faster review rate than others, depending on, what's going on. But again, I was just wondering generally if there is sort of, at a municipal level or at other school board level, is there what is the sort of generally accepted rate of review?
Vice Chair, may I?
Yes.
chime in? So in my experience with municipal government, I haven't seen a scheduled review necessarily of council's procedures, for example. But the bylaws on their governing procedures would be reviewed as often as needed when there's some kind of substantial change to how council needs to operate. So, for example, when the pandemic would have happened and electronic meeting regulations would have been added to the provincial legislation that governs the meetings, then certainly municipalities across the province would have reviewed their council procedures or their governance bylaws to reflect that provision. But aside from that, they aren't substantially changed or reviewed for substantial changes on a regular basis unless there is a need, either by legislation necessitating it, or, for example, the elected body feeling that there is some aspect of that bylaw that isn't serving, their purpose. So the short answer is I don't have there isn't a common time frame that's applied consistently across either all boards or all municipalities in my experience.
Okay, I really appreciate your input on that. Thank you.
Okay, so you're kind of speaking to a as needed kind of cycle, as in alternative. So Jillian, I'm imagining you want to comment on this topic. So with everybody's okay, we'll go to Jillian, and then we have Heather and Tanya, I'm presuming, on this topic. Go ahead, Jillian.
Thanks, Tracy. I just wanted to agree with Jean on that and say that I think it's a caution, actually, that the board doesn't bite off more than it can chew, because it's a lot of work to go through these documents. And so I would suggest the board could use two filters. I think I'm maybe restating what Jean just said, but the first would be if there's been a statutory or regulatory change, you're sometimes forced to review a document because it's no longer compliant with the legislation, and usually you get some trigger that's the case, like the example Jane gave of electronic meetings. The other would be that you go to use the document and it doesn't do the job you need it to do. And I'll give us an example that some boards go to use their code of conduct, and usually it includes a procedure by which they would administer or decide upon a complaint that somebody had breached the code. And if they go to use that process because they get a suggested breach and it doesn't work, they think this is a mess, this isn't helping us at all, it's making it worse, then as soon as that process ends, they're going to go back and try to fix it so that next time a similar circumstance comes up, they have a better tool to use. So it's either, I think what triggers most reviews is either the document's not working for the organization or there's been some change that prompts their review. And if all you do is keep up with those two things, your governance committee will still be busy and still have lots of meetings to go to and lots of work to do. So I kind of think if it ain't broke, you can afford not to fix it.
Okay, thank you. I want to acknowledge that Trustee Oliver is in the room, known as Joanna on committee nights, as well as welcome a bunch of senior staff people that have also joined us for this discussion on bylaws. So we're at item 3.2. Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you so much. I had two little questions. The second one was pretty much answered just in that last answer, Jillian, so thank you. The other one, and just for clarification for myself to make sure that I'm understanding. So all of our committees, is it necessary or is it a must-have to have our governance human on the committee, or can we just make them up any way we like? And because it was spoken a few weeks back that, well, for every committee that we create, one of the governance people should be on it, and I didn't think that was right. But I just want to clarify that.
I think the comment was it's a subcommittee of the governance. It's a piece of the governance work, and therefore it was felt that a person from the governance standing committee should be on that. Does that jive with everybody's recollection? And then we can still get a comment. I just want to clarify a little bit. Yeah, Jillian?
I'm still stuck on why the governance committee would have a subcommittee. So how many subcommittees does the governance committee have?
So Tracy, can I interject?
Of course you can.
So what was proposed is, so right now there's only two people on the governance standing committee. And like everyone said, to review a policy or procedure, it is a lot of work. So when it comes time to doing the nitty gritty of reviewing a policy and procedure, at that time, a subcommittee or an ad hoc or a working group would be created to review a policy, at which point one person from the standing committee would be on that working group, as well as open it to the rest of the trustees who want to be part of that working group. So that was the thought behind that, is only when it comes to reviewing a policy, a governance procedure, would the standing committee create a working group and have at least one person from the standing committee on it, but definitely open to all members of the board.
Thanks for that clarification.
Would you like to comment, Jillian?
So I'm not sure if I'm going to answer the question, but I think that what trustees are struggling with a little bit is as the cascading decision tree that goes from the board that creates the governance standing committee, and perhaps the intervention there would be to make sure that the governance standing committee has really clear terms of reference. So it used to be the governance bylaw and something else committee. Is it now just governance? So governance is a bit of one thing to think about maybe is whether or not that's the right term, because I would say the whole board owns governance. And that's one of those really significant things that shouldn't be delegated to perhaps any subgroup, because everybody owns that as a trustee. But what Tanya's describing is the actual roll up your sleeves work of drafting policies, procedures, and bylaws. And that would be very cumbersome to do as a full board in a large group. So I understand perfectly why you would break that into pieces and divvy it up. So what it sounds like you've described is that your governance committee is actually a policy and procedure review committee, and it asks itself the question on behalf of the board, what needs to be changed, if at all, and if so, how are we going to change it? That sounds like a really heroic task, and the people that take that on should be commended, because it is a lot of work. And certainly it's not the work of two people. So thank you, Tanya. I understand now why you would have working groups or subcommittees that would take on a particular policy or procedure. And it may just be sometimes the task is to look at it and ask yourself whether or not it needs to be reviewed. And if not, you put it back in the drawer, as it were, and move on. So having said all that, I think, so my first comment would be to understand where the authority, where the task of the standing committee begins and ends, and then to properly staff that, or not staff, but properly apply trustee time and energy to that committee so that it has the resources it needs to do the job. But then ultimately to understand that that committee has no authority of its own. It only it's the working group really of the Board of Trustees. And so the people that sit on that committee are appointed by the Board of Trustees. The authority you give to that standing committee comes from the Board of Trustees, and they're going to bring back, any committee is going to bring back recommendations at the end of the day for the approval of the full Board of Trustees. So I think you really want to make sure that a committee with that kind of scope of task is properly resourced. And otherwise, those poor folks are going to spend a lot of time alone in a room drafting documents, and it's hard work. And they can't do that in the end unless they know why they're drafting. And I think that's why I'll tie in my previous remark that it needs to be because something's broken, whether somebody's identified that a policy or procedure is no longer working for the board, or somebody points out that legislation has changed and it's not current anymore.
Okay, thank you. So just to summarize this chunk of the discussion, we're talking about the review cycle, and it's been suggested tonight that the review cycle is kind of on it as needed. And there's a couple of, I'll just call them triggers for lack of better words. But one of them is A, it's not working for us, or we foresee it's not working for the trustees, and B is a legislative change that would require some kind of something to come into compliance. So we do have a couple, no, it's only Andrea. And I also just want to say that we're in a bit of a evolutionary process here as well, in terms of working with Jean and the skills and resources that she now lends to this particular process. And I think, Tanya, and you'll correct me if I'm off track here, but that those conversations and certainly Margot and I in agenda setting have been kind of trying to feel the way a little bit, like, okay, what does this role involve? Because it is kind of an evolution of that position. And so how do we work together, I guess, to get the job done, and certainly to utilize Jean's expertise. And I see you nodding, so I think I'm on. Okay, excellent. So we have Andrea, then Tanya, and I think Margot's the third one. Go ahead.
So my question my question's around committees and transparency and what is sort of kind of required in that area. Do committees, do they have to be somehow open to the full public? If there's a working group like working away on a document, does that have to be open to the public? Do there have to be proper agendas and minutes taken for committee meetings? Like for it to like I know I'm aware that we kind of have a mishmash of that sort of transparency happening at this point. It would be really nice to know sort of what we are obligated as a public institution to do in our committees.
So I don't want Jillian to feel on the spot here, because she really is here to talk about our bylaws, but we have morphed into, I guess, our next big topic of discussion. So I'm going to actually turn to Jean here and see what your thoughts are on that, if it's okay.
Thank you for the question. The Education Act states that the meetings of the board and its committees shall be open to the public. And the principle behind that is transparency in the decision making and that governance role that the board and its committees play. So where a committee has a role to make recommendations for the board for decision, the transparency pieces so that the public can see into that committee's operations in that way. So if the question is, what does a committee need for transparency in terms of, does the public need to see the agendas, need to see the minutes? Certainly the public may request the agendas and minutes of any committee, and they shall be provided access to it by the legislation. So committees should have agendas or some record of the work that they're accomplishing at those meetings. The openness for the public to observe those proceedings would also imply that the public needs to be able to anticipate when those meetings may be, so that if they choose to be present to observe the proceedings of a committee, they have the means to do so. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, we open up a live stream for every single committee's meeting, in the same fashion. But if a member of the public were to say, I understand there's a committee of the Parent Involvement Committee for the Board of Trustees, when do they meet? How do I participate? The transparency pieces, being able to facilitate that participation in that committee. Does that answer the question?
I think it definitely does help. So there needs to be a lot more potential, communication about when meetings are, so that people, and including trustees, might also actually want to observe, or if they're not committee members, may want to observe what is going on. And then I guess you'd want to make sure with freedom of information that if anybody came back and said, hey, I'd like to see the minutes of a meeting or whatever, that you could actually produce them. So I guess we need to also maybe make a repository of where all these things should go, so that Jean, if you need to do that in your role, that it is that it can be facilitated.
Okay, everyone, can I just ask that any other speakers focus their questions on the bylaw. The committee's piece will come back to us. It's all great discussion. I just want to be respectful of Jillian and her time, and also the senior staff that have now joined. So are there any other hands up? Did people take them down at this point? Oh, Tanya, sorry, go ahead.
So all my questions are bylaw related.
Thank you.
Okay. I understand the point about reviewing policies on an as-needed basis, which I think is fantastic. So I'm wondering if perhaps someone could share some historical information as to why, when the policy and procedure framework was adopted, that it was included in it that policies should be reviewed every 3 years. I'm just looking for some historical context, why it was, like, who chose 3? And why did we choose 3? Does anyone know? Okay. Okay, so I think that's something that we can look at, because I know the policy and procedure framework does stipulate that. So perhaps that's another piece that needs to be looked at to remove that stipulation. I'll defer to Jillian now.
I was just going to say, Tanya, that I think the discussion, because I was at the board 3 years ago or thereabouts when we were working on this together for some time. And I think the idea was not that you redo them every 3 years, but you just pull them out and look at them, ask yourself the question, has anything changed? If the answer is no, you put it back again. So it wasn't necessarily meant to be a significant amount of work, just so that it crosses someone's desk. And I think there's some merit to at least looking at them formally with that intent once every period. Whatever is a good fit for the board, maybe 4 years is a better fit than 3. But sometimes things happen in education. I mean, they happen pretty quickly and they go by and everybody's busy with other stuff and maybe you miss something. And then by the time you do pull it out, you think, oh, geez, that changed 2 years ago and we never made the amendment. So I think it wasn't a redo, it was a review, implying a vastly different amount of work in those 2 terms.
Yeah, okay, and that's what I was under the impression, that it was a review. So if nothing need to be changed, then don't change it. We're good for another 3 years, or unless something happens. But would I be able to do a quick poll right now? Are we okay in moving from 3 to 4 years, just to make everyone's lives a bit easier, and so that policies only cross your desk once a term, not twice per term? Yay? Okay, great. That'll be a recommendation we make. Thank you. So then I have another question for Jillian. And I know this has come up before. When we do the election of the chair and vice chair at the inaugural meeting, I know that right now our votes are not recorded. We send them by secret ballot to the director. And in your comments, you mentioned that that's not common across, it's not a common practice. Usually when you're electing, it states that votes shall be by voice, standing, or show of hands. So is that something that we should consider moving towards, or can we just leave it status quo?
Tanya, I think I may have misunderstood. If you're saying that only applies to the election, I think I read that as applying to all votes by the board. And so my comment was that if that's the route the board was going, that would be a difference. But I apologize if I misunderstood.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you meant, yeah. So right now, when we vote for the chair and vice chair, we do not count votes, and nobody knows what the final tally was or who voted for who. So what you're saying then? So that's the only time we don't count votes. Well, not count, but we don't broadcast the results. So are you saying that we're okay to continue down that path?
My understanding of the Education Act is it doesn't treat the voting of chair and vice chair any differently than any other matter that comes before the board. But I would say that across the province that's often not strictly speaking observed, and it's because everybody recognizes that it would just be more comfortable for everyone if you could vote by ballot or but it's whatever you're comfortable with. There's no carve out for the vote for chair, but you know, if people are just would prefer to just announce the result at the end or to say so and so is the chair, then I think it's not the kind of thing you're likely to be held accountable for.
Okay.
And you wouldn't be the only board to do it. Although strictly speaking, it should be like any other vote that you can see how everybody votes.
Okay, so I think those are my only questions for Jillian. I think I have some other questions, but it would be a matter of asking the trustees for their opinions on some of the wording insofar as making changes based on Jillian's feedback. So just to be cognizant of time, I'm done. Thank you so much, Jillian.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, and we have about 10 more minutes on this topic, hopefully 10 minutes or less. Go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you. My question is for Jillian, and that's to further clarify the review of the bylaws every 4 years. Who would be responsible? Would all trustees have to look at them, or could it be up to the like the policy, bylaw, or governance committee or subcommittee with a smaller membership?
Thanks for the question, Joanna. The board absolutely owns its own bylaw. If you want to delegate the task of bringing some recommendations back to the board, to your committee, then that's your purview. And again, I would suggest that you consider the terms of reference for that standing committee and make it clear that that's one of the things the board contemplates doing. But the committee has no authority to change the bylaw. It would have to bring all of its changes back to the board for approval. So it's a question of where the drafting comes from. And I think the idea of a smaller group or legal counsel, as has been done in this case, is a better fit, just because it's lonely work. That's the wrong way to say that. It's very hard to draft in a group. It's not an efficient use of time. It's better for one person to take the pen and go off and do it and bring it back for other people to review and improve.
So follow-up, so to clarify, so it could be a subcommittee reviewing the bylaws every 4 years, and if they identify that they believe something needs to be changed or is not aligned with legislative changes, they would then bring it back to the full Board of Trustees.
Yes, and you could set this up as we've been discussing tonight, so that you ask that committee to make that review every 4 years, or you can leave it that they're available to do the work of the board if the board delegates, because something's come to someone's attention, and sometimes it's just a little tweak that's needed. That's why I hesitate to say we're only going to do it every 4 years, because something may come up. But maybe at a minimum, you want to say, let's pull it out and dust it off, and then for you to decide whether that's at the beginning of the term or the end, because I think reviewing the bylaw is a great training opportunity. So if you're only 3 months into the job and you've just been elected, if there were a meeting where you're forced to go through it, that might not be a bad thing. But the people best positioned to recommend changes are going to be the people who've been living with it for 3.5 years. So there's merit to both kinds of timing. And then I think the issue of, I raised in my memo that, do you want a 50% plus one approval rate, or do you need a 2/3? And I think there's a case for either to be made. So that's up to you.
Okay, thank you. Margot, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me? No, you
Yes.
can't. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can, okay.
Yes.
All right, okay, just checking. So I just have a really quick question, Jillian, because you talked about the pen of the bylaw. So I'm just wondering with this, is it the trustees who should be writing the bylaw, or should they be advising? So as I know Tracy alluded to earlier today, we have this great new amazing woman, Jean, who's come to help us with governance. So do we rewrite or do we advise as far as changing bylaws and policies and procedures? Is it our pen or is it our voice that supports the pen? I don't know if that's a good way to say it or not.
I think, and I hear, Margot, you will hear my bias coming through loud and clear, but I think that drafting a bylaw or a policy or a procedure, especially when you're drafting it to comply with legislation that's very prescriptive, as is the case in education, is the work of, it's either legal work or it's somebody who's developed that particular expertise. And I know I will often feel when I'm doing that kind of drafting for boards of education that it's faster if I just get instructions for what the board wants the end product to look like than if I'm editing work that somebody else has done. It's faster to start with a blank page because I've typically done that kind of work for other boards and I have a pretty good sense of where to start. But you've got the benefit of Jean, which very few boards would have. So you've got somebody that's going to develop that in-house expertise. And so I think what comes from the Board of Trustees in most boards is the concepts. They know what they want the document to say, and the scribing, the actual drafting, is done by somebody who can convert the ideas into a document that reflects what the board wants it to say in a way that is concise and tight and isn't open to interpretation and is a sound document that all 11 people will read and come away with the same interpretation. And there's a skill to that, and Jean has that skill, so you're lucky to have that in-house expertise, and she will over time become more and more familiar with all of your documents, so that some things are going to trigger in her mind, wait a minute, I read that somewhere else, I better go back and check. And so you're going to be in a really nice position with Jean on staff, because you're going to get to the point where your documents cross-reference and you haven't repeated yourselves, and it's just going to get better and better the more that Jean works with them. So I think that's a really fortunate position to be in. And I also think it's very time consuming, and it's a lot to ask of a trustee to do the drafting, because it's just a huge contribution of time. So I think that's a long way of saying that I think trustees can generate a list of bullets, and then somebody with Jean's skill can translate that into a document that is legally enforceable. And those are two different skills. You guys know your board, and you know what you want things to say, and you know how you want to run your meetings and where you want things to go. And Jean is your translator.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, and it looks like our last word is with Tanya.
Thanks. So I just wanted to follow up with Joanna and Margot. So with Joanna, I wanted to give her an example. Over the last year, we have tweaked the bylaw because as we did our business, we noticed that there was lack of clarity, or we needed to change something in the bylaw. So at 2 points last year, changes were brought to the board via motion. And as a board, we all approved the changes. So that's an example of us living the bylaw, not liking something, not understanding something, and us making it better. And then that brings us to where we are today, where it was time to, hey, let's look at the bylaw, see what's working, see if any changes need to be made. And so Amy and I sat down a long time and presented some recommendations. And by no means do Amy and I have any say last time. We just brought the recommendations to committee of the whole for review, for discussion, and that has brought us to where we are today. And even after reading Jillian's remarks, there's still further discussion that needs to be had to ensure that we are all okay with the bylaw that is being proposed. And then to Margot's point about drafting policy, Yeah, definitely. We don't write the policy. That would be great for Jean to do that now that she's here. But I think what's important to note is, as part of the review process, because we do live the policy and we do follow the governance procedure, it's easier when one of 11 of us, or all of us, look through it to see if it makes sense to do what it is we're doing. And I know if we look back at the school naming policy, as we were living through that procedure that evening, we realized, ooh, this doesn't feel right. We need to go back to the drawing board. So in a case like that, it is the trustees who are probably better suited to reviewing it, suggesting recommendations for the entire board to approve, and definitely Jean would be a much welcome help in presenting the document to the board for review and for approval. So just wanted to add those 2 bits of clarity. Thanks.
Thank you. And Margot, wherever you are, it sounds windy.
Oh, it's not muted. Sorry. I'm in a car and I'm getting home. So, okay.
Okay.
If you still hear it, let me know. I'm using the mute on my car versus the phone. So.
Okay. Do you have your hand up still or no? Oh, okay. And it sounds better. Thank you very much. I have a question, Jillian, and that is with respect to the bylaws. You said something recently that it's easier to write from scratch as opposed to, editing and so on. I wonder, with these bylaws, is there anything that's missing that, because I think your memo comments on edits and so on to what was presented, but based on what you know from other boards and the Education Act and so on, is there anything that's missing from there that we should have in there, or do they generally follow leading practices once we work through those things that Tanya was talking about?
I think identify a couple things, Tracy, like private session and the appointment of a treasurer. I think I said should be in there somewhere. But to properly answer that question, a person would have to review your other governance procedures just to make, because some of the things some boards might put in a bylaw, but you might have in a procedure somewhere. Like some boards include a whole delegation thing, and that takes up 3 pages. But I think this board has it in a procedure, so you don't need to put it in the bylaw. In its essence, the bylaw is a description of how you intend to make decisions. So it's there to ensure that you have a process that ensures you have a proper decision-making process, and it's fair to everybody, and you have proper notice and so on of your meetings, and it's to make sure everybody has a fair chance to participate in your decision-making process. And so that's not a thick black line around particular things are in and some things are out. So I would say if you look at it with a lens of, do we have everything we need to have a good board meeting? That's a really good start. Now, some boards have bylaws that are 72 pages long. That's in my view a little silly, because nobody's ever going to read it. So the really important stuff is buried in amongst all the other things and you can't find it when you need it. So I commend this board on having a nice, tight, reasonably lengthy bylaw that is a document that an incoming trustee next fall will not be afraid to pick up and take a look at. So it's very user-friendly that way. I think that it's probably a good idea to hive off some of those things like delegations and put things as an appendix. Like if you've got it as appendix your agenda, then that's probably a good place. But why put it on page 2? You're not going to read it every single time. So I think for the most part, my impression is, but I haven't done a thorough review to answer your question, but it wouldn't take long for Jean to sort of have a look around and make sure that something's somewhere. It's not critical whether you put something peripheral to your decision-making process in the bylaw, or you put it in a procedure somewhere. As long as you've outlined the key things that you need to define how you're going to have a process that makes everybody feel heard and seems fair. That's a long-winded answer, but I think the short answer is it seems to me you've got the important bit somewhere.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Because it just struck me that we're all coming at this from an editor's perspective. We're building on the shoulders or whatever who came before us and the iterations and so on. So with that, I see nobody else with their hands up. So I would like to thank Tanya and your colleague partner in all of this, Amy, for getting us to the point where it could go over to Jean and Jillian, and to Jean and Jillian in particular for your memo and your wise counsel, especially on some of those things that we've been debating a lot over the last few months. So I think we're in a better spot, and we still have some work to do, as Tanya mentioned, and all of that, as you pointed out, is owned by the board. And so Tanya mentioned recommendations coming forward, and that'll all be great. We'll put the next group, whoever they may be, in a really good spot. So thank you very, very much, and keep in touch. I think we'll hear from you again real soon on some of these other things.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good meeting.
Have a great night. Okay. And again, thank you, Tanya. It's not, as you said, you have put in tons and tons of work on this, and certainly given people a lot to think about. And so your process, I'm imagining that you're going to loop back with Amy when she's available. And I have taken some notes, and we started at 6:30. So we were at it for about 60 minutes. So it may also be instructive for whoever's not here tonight to jump in and check that out. Okay. So we are on now to... We have we have a bunch of other things, don't we? Okay, next we're up to the LTAP, and that's Fred. And Fred, there was no presentation tonight because I have heard from Fred that he just has a brief update for us. So over to you, Fred.
Thank you, Tracy. And that's correct. I just have one slide, which I'm not going to forget this time, to put up on the screen, which is just about the next step. So that's pretty much the purpose of tonight's presentation here. Let's just, there we go. All right. So the one thing I just wanted to update trustees, I know since we started in January, or March, we've been given a few of the updates as to how we've been progressing the new vision for the LTAP. We were hoping to hit June with kind of a consolidated version of the entirety of the document, but unfortunately, I think, to be honest, with capital priorities that hit us in February, that set us back about a month, which now, seeing we have the summer months ahead of us, pushes our timing into September. So what I wanted to do is just give trustees an update as to what we're going to be delivering to you in the next few weeks. What we would like to provide you with next week is our target is at least the municipal sections, which contain a lot of the enrollment information as well as the proposed projects that we're looking to put forward. So those, I think, we're going to be ready to provide to you before the end of next week as information, so you can review and provide your comments to us. We also hope to provide the regional overview, which is essentially just a summary of everything else that's happening within the region as well for review by the end of this month. Over the summer, we're hoping to provide you with the front end of the document, which is a lot of the stuff that we had provided in previous iterations of the LTAP. So things like the glossary, definitions of how we do our projections and land acquisition, things that you've already seen before. So we're going to be providing you the newly formatted version of that as well over the summer months. And our intent is to hopefully bring you a completed LTAP document for September. So it's reflecting a little bit of the approval streams we've been doing for the last couple of years here since I started at the board. And then the intent would be to have the final document presented for trustees for final approval for October 19th, which would contain all of the recommendations and the projects within it. The one thing that we're still unsure whether we'll have the full package are all the key performance indicators that we have for the ERA and SRAs. As you recall, a few weeks ago, there's a lot of new ones that we're looking at, things like level of accessibility to our schools, energy, water bottle filling stations. So a lot of that requires us to actually do a lot of survey and then reaching out for that information. So what we're going to do is we're going to release it anyways, even if we don't have all the information, but at least to be placeholders and something the community can expect in a later iteration to be updated. So, you know, in this case, I would say that this is really a living document for the next few years as we build upon it and refine it moving forward. So I just wanted to take this evening to just advise you in case you were expecting it for next week's board meeting. Happy to take any questions or any clarifications you might be looking for, requests on how we're delivering the product moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions?
Perfect. Thanks for your time, everybody. Appreciate it.
Oh, hey, I have one. Fred, so are there any implications to, I guess the next cycle will just be shorter then, right? Because does it still make sense to have this coming in June in general terms unless something comes up?
For next week? Or do you mean next?
No, I mean the next time around. Like, so this time you're doing a complete kind of remodel, capital priorities came up, so it's moved back by, you know, just 1 month in board meeting terms kind of thing. But then is the intent after that, does it make sense still that it comes in June? Like, is that best aligned, or does it make sense from, you know, with it as a tool that it comes in September, October on a regular basis then?
It's a very good question. I'd say that historically, prior to my time, it's come in June, and I'll say that I think it's better to have it in June. So what that allows us to do is, you know, the cycle that we want to do is kind of present this all to the community in more bite-sized pieces. So that'll be the intent for next year, in providing sections of it as we move through certain milestones, and then finally approving in June. What that allows us to do is then come September right away, we can come back to you with our boundary review recommendation report. So that, you know, we're able to start boundary reviews as early as, you know, October, just to get it going, especially for ones that are reliant on implementing something for the next year and trying to get ahead of the registration cycle. We've been fortunate enough in the last couple of years there where it hasn't really impacted our timelines because the implementation of those boundary reviews are further down the road. But, you know, to your point, Tracy, I'd say that it's best to try to get this thing done and over with at the end of June. And to not carry it over on the summer months. So that's our aim and our intent moving forward.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you very much. And so that's when the next bit will come then, or the next big chunk will come in the new school year, which is great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great night. Take care. Okay, so now we are moving into the administrative policies and procedures chunks. And we are doing so really, really well on time. Rob, I think you're here. Yes, welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you.
And so these next two pieces are yours, the Indigenous education policy and equity and inclusive education policy. So over to you.
Thanks so much for having myself. And as you can see, I've invited Shalita Walker, our system principal for Indigenous rights and education, as well as equity and inclusion. She's obviously been instrumental in developing both of the policies that we're here to share with you this evening. Maybe just a high-level overview, beginning with the Indigenous education policy. It was a comprehensive development process and one that involved many different stakeholders and really started last spring. and I wanted to go about it in the right way. Obviously, I did some consultation with our Ministry of Education contacts, as well as some significant contacts in other boards, such as the Upper Grand District School Board, Dufferin Peel, some real leaders in this work. This is a brand new policy for us. Just as a reminder, we've never had an Indigenous education policy. In the past, this work has been noted within our equity and inclusive education policy. Formative to the work in the development process, of course, has been the ongoing and very strategic engagement with our treaty holder. And obviously our understanding our duty to consult and utilizing our Indigenous and Education Advisory Committee in order to provide feedback with respect to the policy. So you can see within the policy itself, we've really tried to identify some key areas. One being the whole area of inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, the duty to consult, the IAC, which I just mentioned, and their role within the board and within our work, and the self-identification process. And we do have a separate policy, a self-ID policy that's been in place for a number of years. It also requires an update, and we hope to have that done in the coming months and bring that forward to the board in the fall. And the final area noted within the policy is with respect to data. As you can imagine, our Indigenous partners are quite concerned, our families, our students, about how any sort of data that we are collecting will be used. Will be used to truly inform our practices in order to create a more effective learning environments for our students and for our staff, or are they going to be used in negative ways, which of course there's a real lack of trust across the broader Indigenous community with respect how data has been used over the years to their detriment. So with that, I don't know whether I missed any pieces there, Shalita. Feel free to jump in, but just that's a bit of a kind of high level overview. Shalita?
No, that's fine, Rob. I think you've captured it as it's laid out. Thank you.
Great. So I would just turn it over to trustees for any feedback that they may have. Oh, and just while you're thinking on that, one point that I forgot to mention is that we understand that there are some real big new pieces within this new policy for the board, and therefore we recommend that there is a broader learning session with the Board of Trustees and hopefully the senior team in the early fall. As you may recall, we were hoping to do something this spring, but it had put that off. And part of the reason for putting it off was having an Indigenous education policy in front of the board would be a much more opportune time to really dig into some of the key conceptual pieces that lie within this policy. I hope that makes sense. Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions? I have a couple. Let's see here. Question number one is that this is quite a bit longer than any of our other policies. We've kind of become accustomed over the last couple of years to that it's a policy statement kind of thing, and then you have procedures that implement or speak to how we'll operationalize the policies. And so I wonder if this is reflective of the complexity of this, of what other your research showed, or why it is the length that it is.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is a great question, and you know what? Maybe I'll send it over to Shalita to answer it for you.
Thanks, Tracy. That's a really good question, and one in which when the policy began in terms of the creation of the policy, one of the things that we're looking at is, as Rob has already shared, this is the first time we've had an Indigenous education policy, and the policy is actually a policy that encompasses all branches of our system. So typically when we're looking at some of the other policies, they're very specific in certain areas, but this policy speaks to staff, it speaks to community, it speaks to students, et cetera, et cetera. So the length in terms of the policy is really reflective of the comprehensiveness and the ways in which it broadly addresses the areas of the system at large.
Yeah, and just further to what Shalita said, I think she's covered it well. We certainly appreciate that it is longer than kind of prior policy statements, but it really does speak to the complexity of this work, and that this is really in many respects really new work. Certainly conceptually, it's new work for the system, and so to have really clear statements about our beliefs and about what's going to ground this work. It was, we felt really important to be clear and articulate and in alignment, to be quite honest, with how other boards have approached this. So this is very much in alignment with other boards and what the Ministry of Education directives have been with respect to this work.
Yeah, and Tracy, if I could just build upon what Rob has shared, is that we know that there will be an administrative procedure that will follow and that will be drawn out of the policy that we have right now. But some of the information that will be in the admin policy, we know that across our system, we're still in very emergent stages of our understanding of Indigenous rights, Indigenous education, and how it's realized in classrooms and the broader system. And so the policy adds as a further allows people who are looking at the admin procedures to go back and have a grounded reference, both in knowledge and understanding through the policy itself.
Thank you. I have another question. I don't see any other hands up here. So with respect to section 1.1, it talks about the ancestral treaty and title lands of now known as the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and those are the HDSB and locally treaty partners, as you've said. And I don't know how to ask this in a good way. You know, in our land acknowledgement, we also acknowledge Métis, for example, and so I just wonder where, if anybody's being excluded here, let's just say, and also that history is so deep. It goes back very, very far. And I guess my interest is just in making sure that this is as inclusive as it needs to be while recognizing treaties and so on.
Yeah, again, yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tracy, for asking the question. And I can hear the hesitation in your voice because I can tell that you really and truthfully want to be respectful to both treaty partner, the process that's taken place, and by being reflective on the language that you're using. And so I'm very grateful for you just giving some pause and thought to that. But at the same time, I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking. I think what I interpret from your question is that in an effort to ensure that when we look at land acknowledgements or honoring the land and territory, we usually reflect on First Nations, Métis, Inuit. And so we see Indigenous peoples as not one large monolith, but the distinctions that exist within them. And I think you're asking in this section by specifically focusing on the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Mississauga Nation, are we leaving out Métis? Are we leaving out other Indigenous groups that may be reflected in on the land that we're in right now? Is that correct? Okay. So one of the things that, and part of the learning in fall that I know that you will walk away with and you'll go, oh, okay, now I get it, is that the Anishinaabe people have been on this land and in this territory from time immemorial, and extends all the way up and further through Ontario and into what we know as Ontario and into what we know as Manitoba and Quebec. And then south across the borders. And so this territorial land is reflective of the original peoples that we know have been here. And so just as any nation, we know that there's migration, there's movement, and there's resettlement, but it is really the recognizing that the original peoples of this place are Anishinaabe and hence our treaty partners. So no, we're not excluding by any means. We're looking at the original peoples of the land of this area.
I'd also referred to section 1.4, right, which just speaks to the when we use the term Indigenous, right, it is in reference to various different groups, such as what Shalita has mentioned, But your question is a really good one, and I think it's actually pretty foundational in terms of the learning that's to take place in the fall.
Okay, thank you. Tanya, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is, I can understand what Tracy's trying to say, because when I read the policy, we use the term, let me see if I can get the right term, Mississaugas of the credit, full stop. But when we read the land acknowledgement, we say Mississaugas of the credit First Nation. And then also in the land acknowledgement, we refer to the Anishinaabe, the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, surrounding the lands, surrounding the Great Lakes. So I think, and maybe this was what Tracy was alluding to, is why is our land acknowledgement different than what's in the policy? Is there a reason for that, or do we need to relook at the land acknowledgement? I'm just trying to figure out why there's a disconnect in the language used between the two.
Thank you, Tanya, for the question that you're asking. And if you're okay, Rob, if I respond? So one is showing original peoples. The land acknowledgement, or honoring the land and territory, is honoring what we know to be in existence now, right? So we know that in existence, we know that there are a broad group of peoples under the umbrella of Indigenous people that are on this land, pass through the land, work in partnership in this land. But we also know that the historical origins are the Anishinaabe people. So much as we may have Anishinaabe people who are in other areas within the larger scope of what is now known as Canada, we know that would not have been where the original land was. And so the policy is, I would say, is really the foundation. This is the foundation. And then the land acknowledgement that you're reference to is born out of and a reflection of where we are. And it's an evolutionary process as well. So our land acknowledgement is currently being through consultation with treaty partner, is being revised to be a little bit more reflective. So that will evolve and change, but the facts of who the original peoples are does not. That is still true in place.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you. Rob, you mentioned the self-identification piece. And in point 5.1, it states that any students who are 18 or older, or all parents and guardians of Indigenous students, will have the opportunity to voluntarily self-identify. Is this separate from the student census, or is this as part? Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Joanna. It is separate. This self-identification, our self-identification policy is based on, as it says there, on the framework that was released back in 2007, which required all boards to have a formal self-identification policy in place. We know, however, that a number of our students over the years have not felt comfortable in accessing that self-ID process. And we know many reasons why, for fear of discrimination. Whereas the student census, which is a separate and distinct process, that process is demonstrated to us that there's many other students who self-identify as Indigenous, but have not done so formally through our formal self-ID process. So yeah, they're interconnected and interwoven, but certainly separate and distinct. And the other piece I would say with respect to data and data collection is we are working quite closely with our treaty holders, such as Nancy Rowe, and with especially as it relates to the disaggregation, the current disaggregation of the data that's been collected through the student census, particularly as it pertains, obviously, to students who are self-identified as Indigenous.
Follow up. So Rob, could you then speak a little bit to how a student would go about self-identifying, or a parent?
Yes, absolutely. It's actually, as we speak, we've done a lot of work on building up the area of our website with respect to human rights and equity. You'll notice there's been a number of different changes, hopefully positive changes, as we have reviewed and update that area of our broader board website. An area that needs a great deal of work and focus immediately as we get back in the fall is the area of Indigenous rights and education. Some of the information that up there is quite dated, and what also is not crystal clear is clear directives on our self-ID process. So at the moment, they're encouraged to reach out. That connection is then made with our Indigenous education lead, Tammy Hardwick, who then guides that student through the process, through the self-ID process. But we understand and recognize that there needs to be a much more clarity and transparency, for those who are seeking further information, who may not necessarily go to our actual board policy, which of course is quite high level, right? They need much more specific information about what are the steps involved, who should they be connecting with, and what can they expect throughout that process.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead, Leah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I noticed that there is a reference to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action. And I was just wondering how that document informed this work. Like, what sort of, are we achieving or meeting what calls to action in this policy?
Yeah, certainly it provides the broader direction, right? But at the time, I think when we certainly really dug into this work in a meaningful way, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, we were solely relying on those three big, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. I want to say 62 and 63 There's three calls to action in particular, which directly relate to education and educational institutions, and over the years, those have provided some real high-level direction. But since that time, there's been obviously a number of really other formative documents and information that's helped guide our work, such as UNDRIP and so on and so forth. And those are noted in the policy. So it provides that very high level, but I'm really proud of where we're at as a board, because in the past it was more, I would say, kind of random strategies and that were loosely connected to those calls to action. Whereas now what we're bringing forward is a much more strategic approach and vision that certainly directly relate, but are guided by some much more specific goals and expectations outlined in a number of other governing documents.
Thank you for this work.
Yes, and that is a great way to end this piece, seeing no other hands up at this point in time, just with thanks. This is very exciting work. So Rob, did you want to move on to the second one? Rob and Rita?
Yeah, that would be great. And I just have to say, Jewel, jump in anytime as well. Certainly, Jewel has been instrumental as well in working alongside Shalita, myself, as well as our teams. So both in the development of the Indigenous education policy and providing high-level oversight, as well as certainly with the a document that we're going to share with you now, which is our equity inclusive education policy. As you may be aware, we currently have and have had an equity and inclusive education policy in place for a number of years. It is certainly quite dated and certainly needed a major overhaul. So what's before you now, while directly connects and is technically a revision, obviously it's a significant revision. In terms of the developmental process, we had a really good look at obviously what the current state is in terms of our current board policy, and then did a pretty intensive comparison study with what exists in a number of other school boards who we feel are kind of at the level that we are with respect to this work. Specifically the TDSB, Peel, York, Ottawa, Carleton, and Hamilton Wentworth, just to name a few. And so that became kind of instrumental as we worked through this broader review process. As I mentioned, Jewel was involved, as was our human rights and equity team, and in the development and the really building a much more robust policy than we'd had in place in the past. All based on the premise that there is no excellence without equity. And we know that, we have proof of that over the years. We can look at our sense of belonging data or really any sort of data set. And while we've done quite well broadly as a board, we haven't necessarily moved the needle, much like many other boards, particularly with respect to those students within our system who have, who belong to identities that have, traditionally been marginalized over the years. So in building this new policy, again, it's much more lengthy than the prior one, and we're certainly aware of that. Another key strategy was, of course, looking at what governed our original policy, which was the Ontario Equity Inclusive Education Strategy, which is quite dated now, but certainly there are many critical components in that which now certainly live and are further enhanced within this new document. Not to mention, the inclusion of core work within our multi-year plan and within the way forward within this document. So if you look at the area of, and I won't go through it all, obviously, we're quite limited in time, but the first area around shared leadership. So that is an area that was well documented within the Ontario Equity Inclusive Education Strategy back in the early 2000s, and is an area that was highlighted within our former policy. But within this one, it has been much further enhanced to really look at, rather than just noting that we need to listen to our communities. Within our new policy, you can see that yes, we've recognized that we need to be committed to doing that, but we also need to be committed to being responsive. And so throughout the document, hopefully you will see how we've taken some of those initial commitments from the original, and certainly further enhance them to be much more reflective of where our commitments need to be today. So Jewel, Shalita, anything else you'd like to note for the trustees?
Thanks, Rob. No, I think that's a great high-level overview, and in many ways, the policy speaks for itself.
Ditto, can I say that?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Again, a much longer policy type document than we've been accustomed to seeing, and I'm imagining the response. The reason why is the complexity and the depth and breadth of the direction, big picture direction that is trying to be given. Are there any questions by trustees? I have a question. And Shalita, you said, you commented last time on, I do hum and haw around a bit, because that's not what you commented, because I'm trying to kind of choose my words carefully, and yet so they are understandable. But on page 4 at the bottom, Halton recognizes and endeavors to establish and maintain collaborative relationships with diverse communities. I get that. The next part, so perspectives and experiences of all students, families, and employees are recognized and addressed. Conceptually, I get that as it relates to the first part of the sentence. However, is that really correct? I mean, if somebody has a racist perspective, how does that come into here? Because that doesn't align with the values and purpose of this policy. So I'm basing this from, some of the feedback and tricky conversations we had around Reimagine Forward and the diversity of opinion that exists in the community. And one of the things that I've heard is that, anyway, that's the genesis of my question. Jewel, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. That's an excellent question. And if you'll note, the specific language is that all perspectives are recognized. So if something is from a racist perspective, it is to call it for what it is, to the extent that it is not in alignment with what the objectives are, and to address it. And so that issue of addressing is to hold some measure of accountability for what that comment is, to provide a level of awareness raising or education. So it is to recognize that there are different perspectives, but to really hold a measure of accountability for those perspectives that are out of alignment, as I said, with the objectives, the spirit and purpose of the policy. Rob, Shalita, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, Jewel, I think you captured it. I'm smiling because that was actually a sentence that we revised for that very reason, where we said, okay, well, wait a minute, we're going to honor all voices. Like, there's some voices that are very problematic and harmful. And so we really landed on that language of, we recognize, we're going to name it for what it is, and we'll address it if that means that taking the measures that we need to be responsive to harmful language, or to be responsive to inclusive language. And so we felt that that was we really were intentional in selecting those two verbs.
Yeah, and we're certainly open if there's, as with anything in these policies, if there are recommendations or thoughts or considerations around language or other, we're certainly happy to take that back. Certainly prior to bringing it to the board meeting on the 15th, or certainly prior to bringing the final version forward in the early fall. I think the piece with respect to what you're saying, and I think what you're trying to get at, as has been noted, is fundamentally our goal as a public board of education is to work towards inclusion and full inclusion, and you can't do that by allowing exactly what Shalita and Jewel have mentioned, voices that bring hate or are discriminatory to particular identities within our space. So we have a responsibility and a broader guardianship, I believe, in terms of ensuring the spaces that we are creating, while they're while we would recognize, but we also need to be very careful in how we are addressing those and ensuring that they are not harmful in any way to our students.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions, and we'll just take a minute here because this is tricky stuff, and I am so mindful that I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I've got questions. Like, there's, based on what we heard during Reimagine Forward, and yeah, I think we are in a time, it feels like, where people have gone back into them. The world has become smaller. It has, I'll speak for myself only, but my world's become much smaller. My household, I see what I see, and I think I know certain things, which I think we have an opportunity to unpack some of these ideas so that we can bring many more people along this pathway. Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. Can I take a second to respond to that? Is that okay? Oh, okay, it's okay. All right. I was just going to say that we learn by asking good questions. And asking the questions isn't the challenge. It's whether or not we're in a place that we're ready to listen, to hear, and put aside what we see or believe to be true or to be the only perspective or the only way, and to allow other voices in so that we can hear and then engage in conversation that allows to shift and delve a little bit deeper into maybe some of those thoughts or perspectives that are challenging or harmful or hurtful or restrictive. And so asking questions is always great. It's how do we create spaces where those questions can be heard, and that the person asking can also adopt a stance of listening and listening to learn, listening to broaden, rather than listen to challenge, listen to stay in their position. So never apologize for asking questions, is my opinion that I just wanted to share.
Awesome. And just trying to make that space for people to do so, and really appreciate that response. Joanna, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for this, Rob and Shalita. As I look at the policy, looking at the religious creed accommodation, I really like that section. And it kind of dawned on me, don't know how to say it, but the policy is about equity and inclusive education. And in essence, it gets really at the core of human rights as well. is there an opportunity, maybe in that section, to address the disconnect between some of the religious aspects and how they, for some, conflict with their human rights? So a religious view on sexual orientation, for instance. I'm just going to put it out there for you to think about. I'm not sure you have an answer. It just occurs to me that sometimes we know there's a disconnect. And how do we protect the human rights for those where that disconnect exists? Thank you.
Yeah, and just before Jewel jumps in to answer your question, Joanna, the religious and creed accommodation, just so you're aware, is another document that's been continuing to evolve, right? Like all of this work, and we certainly have an administrative procedure that's been in place with respect to religious and creed accommodations for students and staff. But we're actually in the review process of that document as well. So that will be another one that will be coming back probably with much less significant revisions, but still is being updated currently as we speak. But over to you, Jewel.
Thanks for your question, Joanna. And I think really demonstrates a lot of the deep questioning that we've all encountered this year. So you use the language of conflicting human rights, and there is a framework around conflicting human rights, but the issue that you present doesn't fit squarely within that framework, because where you're looking at religious or Indigenous spirituality or creed rights, there's a full entitlement to engage in those or not engage in those according to each individual's choice. Where you're looking at issues of gender identity and sexual orientation rights, there's similarly equal protection for those. So those rights are not in conflict, right? Because we don't have a hierarchy of rights. Those rights all have equal status to the extent that they represent aspects of individuals, right? Or aspects of communities. What happens though, I think in the example that you're thinking of, is people preference or privilege their perspective over somebody else's, right? So as much as when I responded to Tracy earlier about how we recognize and address perspectives, I think the issue, and Shalita spoke to this, is how are we raising awareness when people are centering their information or their perspective or their comment or their behavior or their exclusion, which is quite often what it turns out to be, from a particular perspective or a particular experience, without opening up for the full scope of human rights inclusion, right? And so the idea, and I think Rob spoke to this, is how are we creating a culture where all rights and identities can exist without discrimination, without recrimination, without denial, without exclusion, right? So that is the ideal, and also without, as I said, prefacing or creating a hierarchy amongst those rights. So I think when people say, an aspect of your identity is in conflict with my human rights, those two things are very different, right? Because there is an inequality of human rights. I think the example also doesn't consider the fact that people could belong to a particular faith, which historically might not be very welcoming to particular sexual orientations or gender identities. And I think that, in fact, can be said of almost all faiths, right? So all faiths historically have this challenge, particularly around same-sex relationships, around transgender identities, around bisexuality, right? But there is an evolving recognition of those identities, and as I said, the sort of equality of human rights. And again, to go back to Rob, I think what we do as a school board is really to raise the awareness and educating people about that. And as Shalita said, it's healthy to ask the questions and have those discussions, because that's the way that we engage people in conversation and raise awareness, right? I don't know if that specifically answers your question.
Okay, I see nodding and smiling. And Curtis, did you? Nope, you're just saying hello. Excellent. Okay, thank you. All very, very, very good stuff here. And I find it's very thought inducing and question generating. So thank you very, very much. These will both be coming to board. So if people haven't had a chance to kind of crystallize what your thoughts are, there'll be another opportunity. And then these would be coming for 2 readings as new policies, I'm imagining. And then after that, it will be interesting also. I think I'll be asking at the board, what is the plan to launch these into the HDSB system so that, people can really understand. There's a lot of words here, and what do they really mean, if anything different, for what people are doing. And I'm imagining it does mean something different. So I'll be asking that question when the time comes. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Shalita, Jewel, and Rob, awesome work. Okay, so we will move to the admin procedures then. I understand that some of them are just fine tunes. So hopefully we can get back on track here in terms of the timing. So 3.4.3, we have accessibility standards for customer service, actually, which is not a fine tune, but this one's coming back to us again. Go ahead, Ian, through Director Ennis, through Curtis, go ahead.
Thanks. Good evening. Yeah, it is mostly a fine tuning and updating of some of the language, and I'll say explicitly the integrated accessibility standards. We lacked referencing that in the previous iteration. So that's been updated to replace the standards that were revoked back in 2016. This covers monitoring and feedback, notification of service disruption, use of service animals, use of support persons, and use of assistive devices in our schools. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Tanya.
Not related to the actual AP, but I noticed that there's a review date 2 years from now. So I wanted to ask, is there an unspoken rule that APs get reviewed every 2 years, or are we adding more work than is probably unnecessary?
I'm not sure I'm the expert to answer that question. I think we were under an assumption that these were coming forward every 2 years. I'm not sure that is necessarily required. So yeah, happy to take advice from others.
And I think this is a global question that goes back to our bylaws discussion and that review cycle. David, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I was just going to chime in to say we don't have a specific review cycle. I would say, 2 years is kind of the norm. I would agree with Ian, but we have some APs that we might put 3 or 4 years if it's a relatively static topic that doesn't change often. And we may have some that we want to review on an annual basis because, the landscape is changing out there. So it's, we've taken the position that it's really AP and content dependent.
Thank you. It might be interesting through Jean to see whether there are any opportunities to kind of synchronize how these things work between the governance side and the, yeah, go ahead, Jean. And as somebody pointed out in the chat, sometimes it's legislative driven as well. Go ahead, Jean.
I don't have a comment to add other than I'm noting the feedback on the kind of review cycle of these administrative procedures, and we'll take that back for review.
Thank you. So sounds like that one should be okay when it comes to the board table. People have had it well in advance, and so thanks a lot for the opportunity to hear what's changed as well. I know at one point in time it was asked that like the changed part be highlighted so we can figure that out. I don't know how much work that is, but certainly if that's not possible, exactly what you did in terms of kind of flagging what those things are, so we understand, that's much appreciated. Sorry, are you just waving or do you want to jump in here?
No, I was going to say that just to build on Ian's comments with respect to his AP, I was part of that committee at one point. The date, and I have a bit of a historical background, the date with respect to that AP was also aligned with the fact that the accessibility AP also links to a multi-year plan or a strategic plan around accessibility. So we thought we would align the review of the plan with the AP. And as I pointed out in the chat box, some of those APs, the review dates are, enshrined in legislation. And some of the review dates are really a product of the fact that the AP is an AP that's regularly referenced and is part of our everyday business more so than other APs. So we feel that an annual review is not a bad thing. So there's a variety of factors that determine the review dates.
Okay, super. Thank you. And that's partially in response to Tanya's question as well. Alrighty, so I think we can move on to the board assigned mobile cellular devices one, which is Gord and Roxana. Hello, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. And I'll be proactive and say this review date is 3 years. And it's really to what David said. It's a pretty static admin procedure, and it's here some minor revisions, and it's more about accounts payable on how staff need to pay back the board when they travel outside of Canada. So a little bit of, we tighten that up a little bit, but either Roxanne or I are happy to take any questions, but it's not many changes at all to this AP. Thanks.
Okay, we'll take that silence as meaning it's golden. So thanks very much for being here to let us know what the changes are. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
You too. And so now we'll move on to vendor performance management. Go ahead, Roxana.
And with regards to the vendor performance management, it is containing a few edits as it relates to the scoring rubric as well as the evaluation criteria. It has been given a go with Ian's team in a couple of evaluations, both something that is positive as well as one that is not so positive, just to see how that works. And it's been tweaked in collaboration with facility services, as well as it meets some of the requirements from our auditors in terms of having some specific criteria when we would put this in place, when we would conduct a performance evaluation on our vendors. And myself and Ian would be happy to address any questions.
Okay, there are no questions, and you answered mine, which is, has it been applied and how's it going? Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So this will come in the consent agenda package, I would imagine. So thanks very much. And we can go then to 3.4.6, Plan Student Behavior Prevention, Management, and Intervention, which was formerly Managing Violent and Aggressive Behavior. Colette, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Certainly, there is a change to this AP, certainly starting with the title. So as Tracy mentioned, it used to be called Managing Violent and Aggressive Behavior. And the change in the title certainly reflects the change in the tone or the perspective of the AP. So the AP now really positions behavior as a form of communication, and that it's the responsibility of the adults to understand, respond, and intervene rather than fix the behavior. So the former version was for students with special education needs. The language in this AP has it applying to all students. And it considers the intersectionality of identity, mental health, and trauma, which is the whole person approach that we're really emphasizing in our department work. And finally, the emphasis is on proactive as well as responsive measures for students. I'm happy to take any questions.
Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you. I read through this a few times, and the one concern that I had, and it popped up a couple times, and I can't quote it because I don't have it in front of me here. It talked about supply staff and reading the behavior plan. And my concern, I guess, was our supply staff that are coming into the classrooms trained well enough to work with a student who would have a behavior plan. I understand that the AP says, the person will read through and understand risk and will be explained risk with working in the classroom with that particular student. But on a supply basis, is the supply human trained to work with that kind of student?
Well, we have a few different levels of training. We have the theory training, which is provided to all staff, which gives them that really that understanding of the proactive approach, but also the defensive measures or protective measures to keep themselves safe. Then there is the physical training, and that is done for teaching staff that are listed on the core team. And all educational assistants, supply, and permanent staff. So they will receive that, both the theory and the physical training. We also then have a third tier of training, and that's the student specific. And this is the training that our supply staff would not have. And so I would agree that simply reading the plan is not the same as having that student specific training and rehearsing the plan. And it's for that reason that we've really been explicit that supply staff should play a supporting role when supporting students with safety plans and not the physical role. So if a student needs to be contained, it really shouldn't be a supply staff member that's playing that role in the plan, but really that supporting role. What are the other kids doing, making sure the other students are safe. Because yes, the student-specific training is an important level of training.
Thank you for that clarification.
Go ahead, Margot.
Hi, thank you. So Colette, thank you. I really appreciate the shift in language and focus of this plan. My question is how do when do you talk about the training, but when do teachers on the ground hear of the shift in policy focus? So I'm sure you talk to administrators, but then regular teachers and EAs, how do they hear about the shift in policy?
It's a great question. So when this was first rolled out a number of years ago, there was very intensive training done in teams. So the school brought a team to a full day training that was led by, at that point, Student Services. We're looking at kind of doing a similar approach in the fall and having schools attend as teams. So the principal would identify some staff to join that session and really use that opportunity to focus on the whole person approach, to reset the focus around that shift in our thinking around the prevention, management, and intervention, and the consideration of identities. So we are planning some intensive a retraining to complement the work that was started a number of years ago.
Okay, so can I have a quick follow-up? So you said, do all teachers hear this? Like you said that the admins will select, but will all teachers get this reshift and focus?
So my apologies. So when this was rolled out originally, then those teams went back and led the learning with the staff at the school. So that would be the same model. So that train the trainer, the team that comes for the in-person training would have a responsibility to go back and lead the training at the school. I would just add also that philosophy and that approach is embedded in the BMS theory training that all staff do, and it's reinforced in the in-person physical training and the student-specific training as well. So for staff who go through all three tiers of training, their approach is already embedded there, but there will also be that staff PD that's led by the team.
Go ahead, Heather.
Just one other comment. I really like that it also focuses on the safety for the staff, and that there's ownership with the administration and follow-up and debriefing. I know we've always had that, but it's really very point blank. This is what we do, and I love that. It's great.
Thank you, Heather. And we're going to invest quite deeply in the debriefing. We know that that's a really critical point in terms of, really validating the employees' feelings of safety and support, but also then to reflect on, what as adults did we do to contribute to the situation, and what as adults do we need to do to avoid triggering another event. So we plan on investing quite deeply in the debriefing process.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much. It's another super important area of focus for the board. Awesome. Okay, so trustees, it's about 8:30. Do you want to take a 5-minute break? I see some. Yeah, okay, so just come back at 8:40. And we'll still try to be done in the next hour or less. Okay, 8:40. We'll see you soon.
Andrea or Leah, could either of you confirm for me if the agenda that you were viewing at the top of the meeting, Tracy, if the agenda you're viewing at the top of the meeting had the safe driving AP and the performance appraisal for DECEs?
Oh.
It did.
Mhm.
I think we might have had some version
Right.
problems.
Okay, let's do those right away then.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so which one's next then? Go ahead, whoever's up next.
Yeah, it's hi Tracy, hi everyone, good evening. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see the APs. The two APs before you are the safe driving AP and the DEC growth and appraisal AP. No substantive changes to either one. In terms of the review dates, the safe driving AP is reviewed annually. We can certainly review those revision dates. I don't believe it needs to be reviewed annually. The DEC growth and appraisal AP, it's a relatively new AP. It was implemented as of this fall, the fall of 2021. And so the review date was really to sort of reflect on its implementation. Obviously, its implementation has been more or less derailed or paused or, withdrawn due to COVID and other factors. So, but those were the factors that drove the review dates. But again, both APs are coming back to the board as is. There are no substantive changes to either one. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Hey, sorry you waited around for 10 extra minutes.
No worries. I thought you forgot about me.
Never. I just have, I printed out the agenda and then traveled and not the most recent one. Okay, so onward then. Thanks a lot. And we'll see that at the board then in short order. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night. And welcome to Vandy. Nice to see you. So we'll jump in now to the trustee kind of led items. We'll go to 3.5.1, which is board self-assessment. And so we're understanding committees. And I just kept this one on here this time just to say that Margot and I have an opportunity to talk to Jean during the agenda setting. And so I believe it was at the last one or recently anyways, we've talked about that governance self-assessment, the recommendations that we approved this year. And there were a couple of them, such as requesting the director to consider cost implications in the reports that come forward and also the tie-in to the multi-year plan. So that's something that Jean is looking into in her role. So just wanted to update everybody on that. And certainly the rest of them seem to be well in play and positioned to be accomplished by the end of this term, which is when we kind of set ourselves the timeline. So item 3.5.2, I don't see any discussion, so we'll just keep going in the interest of time. Public delegation policy and governance procedure. That is 3.5.2. And Tanya, that's over to you.
Sure, thanks. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review the draft version of some revisions and recommended changes. So here's an example where 3 years, it's time to review. And guess what? When we took a look at it, we saw some discrepancies as to what the policy says versus what it is we do, or perhaps what we would like to do. So if you take a look at the policy, the most, I guess the one item we need to discuss is the objective. And I've highlighted the word for decision. So I'll read it out to you until everybody gets a chance to get into the document. Right now, the policy says that members can come before the board on matters that are for decision. So essentially what the policy is saying is that we'll only hear from the public in the form of a delegation if it's on a matter that's for decision. And as we're all aware, we do have members that come to the board to delegate on items that are not for decision. So I think this is one of those things that we just change the wording. We all agree that that members of the public can come to the board on all matters, or are we sticking to the policy and saying that they should only come to the board for decision? So I'm going to put it out to all of you to share your thoughts. And then based on our discussion tonight, I'll revise the document to reflect everyone's wishes. So I'll open the floor for feedback.
Go ahead, Margot.
Let the others go first because I'm just trying to find something. Please.
Okay. Others, Andrea's next, and then Leah, and then we'll come back to Margot. Thank you.
I would be fine with removing actually for decision. I do think, however, that it should be on matters that come before the Board of Trustees. But for, if it's on an information item, I think that's fine too. I think that otherwise we could end up, I think there may be other channels to help things come to a table if there is a big issue, through a trustee or something along those lines, rather than just having things come out of nowhere and they're not tied in any way, shape, or form to our agenda at all.
Go ahead, Leah. I'm imagining, Tanya, you are collecting. We'll hear how the group goes on this topic. Go ahead, Leah.
Thank you. My comment actually builds upon what Trustee Gervais has just said. So currently, as I understand, our policy currently allows only matters that are at the discussion of the board at that moment. So it's only what's on the agenda. So my question is, what are other boards doing? Because I know, I looked at our municipality and they are very much aligned with delegations are only accepted if they relate to what is being discussed on the agenda. But I haven't looked at other boards. So I'm just wondering if there has been any reflection, or have you looked at what others are doing with this respect? Because I think it's really interesting to see what other people are doing.
So I'll reply to Leah. So no, I did not go and check to see what other boards or municipalities are doing. I think maybe it's a matter of us having a discussion this evening to see what it is we want to do. Personally, I think we should be hearing from members of the public. It does make sense if they are coming to us on a matter that's on the agenda, not necessarily for an item that's for decision. I would opt to remove the words for decision from the policy and just have the public be able to delegate on anything that's on the agenda. And to what Andrea said earlier about even if it's an item on the director's report. And I'll give you a recent example of the parents from Munns Public School who delegated with respect to the health issues, which wasn't a decision we were making that evening, but it was an item that was going to be discussed in the director's report.
Just a follow-up, please. So I'm just interested to hear, like before I would make a recommendation, I would like to understand what other boards are doing, what their practice is. I certainly, my perspective is I'm okay with, I'm absolutely in support of members coming to us delegating on issues that are on the topic, but I want to understand the implications if we are opening up to every issue that is not in alignment with what's on the agenda. So I want to see what other boards are doing and what implications there are if we do entertain delegations that are not speaking to items on the agenda.
Jean? And then we'll go to Margot and Donna.
Thank you. So Trustee Reynolds, in response to that, I've looked at the Toronto District School Board's delegations procedure, for example. I haven't done a fulsome environmental scan of all school boards, but to give some idea of other practices along other boards, it does state that delegations in their request to delegate would identify the agenda items, and from other local government perspectives, that's also in line with the practice. And from a kind of value both to the board and to the delegates who are bringing their perspectives to the board, by ensuring that the delegates are speaking on topics that are before the board, there's an opportunity for the staff to speak to those items in a meaningful way, so that there's a two-way dialogue. The trustees may ask questions so that the time both of the delegate and the trustees are all well used within that meeting.
Thank you. Okay, yep, Margot, then Donna, then Andrea.
Okay, thanks. So I agree with Tanya in that I think it's really important that we hear from the community. So I think that is part of what we are, is providing that voice for the community. And I know I've had this conversation with Leah previously. And so it's really interesting, Tanya, when you look at what you've brought, which is the policy, and then what we have under on the website about, well, so again, the policy, and it has down there about consideration of request, saying that it is down to the chair to determine whether or not the delegation is acceptable. And I kind of think that having an absent of voice is like, I think that's a piece that's missing from our board table. I think it's nice to hear from the public. So I think it should be related specifically to board business. But I don't know, as you said, Tanya, that it needs to be something that we're making a decision on at that moment, because it could be something that comes up later. So, I think that it should be broadened. And again, in line with what we have on the website. So the policy on the website, it talks about, it goes into a little bit more information about that. So if we're saying that there, we need to say that there. So just a little piece.
Donna. I can't hear you myself. No, I can read your lips though.
I can hear you, Donna.
Andrea and Tanya and Heather cannot for some reason.
We have like
Curtis cannot. Nope.
Yeah, okay, so all she is saying, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So that's really weird. What Donna is saying is she just agrees with what we were saying.
Oh, awesome. It's good we have this network connection thing happening. Okay, I'm glad that Donna's perspective jumped in here despite the technical stuff. Yeah. Okay, Andrea, go ahead.
I'm cautious about opening it up further to hear on any topic. We are a board that we don't have resources to go chasing windmills. So we need to remain focused, and we need to, have our resources focused on moving the business of the board further. And as I said, there's other avenues if people have a topic that they feel should come to the table. Perhaps they should go through a trustee, or maybe have they gone through everything, or is it really a system thing? If it is, perhaps they talk to trustee, perhaps they bring a motion forward, then it gets on the agenda, and then we talk about it, and then everybody's prepared to handle it, rather than just delegations coming out of nowhere with some topic. Because again, the way our delegations work, people only need to have a phrase or so to tell us what they want to talk about. And so it's, as I said, we don't have the resources to go to just throw at things. We have to be we have to be conservative with the resources we have. So I would just be wary about flinging that door wide open at our meetings to delegate, and then setting up expectation that those things will be followed.
Okay, Margot, is your hand up again?
Yeah. I'm not saying to fling the door wide open, but I do think we should allow delegations relating to board business, and it should be broader than just what Tanya was saying in her piece about wrong document for decision. I think that it's important we hear that's why we're elected, I think, to hear the voice of the community.
Thank you. So we'll hear Kelly and then see where we land.
Andrea said exactly what I was going to say. I'm afraid about opening up the door to things beyond what is on the actual agenda, because we have had requests in the long distance past for some items that were actually either operational or something that was not on the agenda and would have derailed some of the business of the board at the time. And as Andrea had said, there are ways to get it brought on. I mean, a trustee can bring the topic to agenda review to have it as a discussion, or it can be part of a review of something. But there are many ways to get it there, so that if that person wants to have their voice heard, then there's an opportunity. And I'm not saying I don't want to hear from all those people, because I do, and I want to hear what people say. But I don't think we should just say delegations, there's no criteria. I do believe it needs to stick to what is on the agenda. And I know, Margot, you were saying, I know you weren't saying not to. I just wanted to say that I really think you need to stick to what's on the agenda.
Okay, Tanya, it sounds like.
Okay. So just from a show of hands, so I think what we're saying is we do want to hear from members of the public, but we want it to be on an item that's on the agenda. and it does not have to be an item that is for decision. Okay. All right. So what I'll do is I will remove the words for decision from the policy. And when it's presented to the board, it'll read that the public can delegate on any matter that's on the agenda. All right, good. Moving along, that was very good feedback. So moving along, the governance procedure that is the companion piece to this policy. You'll see that there's been some feedback already from some of the trustees, and Jean has also entered some comments. The items that I want to, actually what I'll do first is I'll highlight, not highlight because I didn't highlight anything, but I'll go over what has been revised, and you can follow along on the very last page of the GP for your reference. So the first thing is the recommendation is to shorten the title from public delegations to the Board of Trustees and shortening it to delegating the board. It also makes it easier when the public is searching for information. Chances are they're going to type in the word delegate as the first search word, so it'll pop up sooner. What we've also done is we've incorporated Jean's new role, and that is the Manager of Governance and Board Services. So throughout the document, you'll see references to the manager, and the manager refers to Jean. The other thing is we removed the scheduling from, there was a table with scheduling, if it's on a Friday, do this, if it's a Tuesday. Anyway, it was convoluted and unnecessary. So we've removed it, which it allows for more flexibility. Item number 4, publication and privacy notice. We've added a paragraph indicating that meetings are live streamed and recorded. So in case anyone had any doubt that their delegation would not be seen by anyone other than us, now they do know that it is recorded, it will live on in perpetuity, and it's an FYI. The item number 5, special delegation nights. We changed the time frame from 7 to 2 days prior to the meeting, because chances are if a special delegation night is being called, we want the delegations to come in and just shorten the window as to when people can actually send in their material. So it makes more sense to reduce the time frame to 2. And in the last 3 years, we haven't had any special delegation nights. So we'll see how this holds true going forward. And the last item was we removed the timelines for delegation and requests table, only because there was some conflicting information as you read through the procedure versus what the table said. So those were high level what was removed. The recommendations that came out of this review is to include the delegation topic on the board agenda. So right now, when we do have a board meeting on the agenda, we have people's names, but we have no idea what they're delegating about. So the recommendation is to include the topic on the agenda item. One of the recommendations, and Margot did allude to this, is to make sure that the information in the policy and the procedure actually matches what's on the website, because there is some disparity between the two. And the third recommendation is to have to include a notice collection statement for privacy, so that when people are submitting their request to delegate, that there will be a form outlining privacy issues and whatnot. So those are some recommendations that came out of this. What I wanted to go over with you tonight. And you'll see Tracy has made some comments, and so has Andrea and Jean, so you can follow along. Let me just move my document along. One of the biggest disparities was between our own policy and our procedure. So the policy included the words for decision, that we would only look at delegation items for decision, but our procedure was thinking something else. It didn't follow that. So we're going to ensure now that the policy and the governance procedure are in sync insofar as when we will take public delegations. The next item is with respect to receiving supplementary materials. I know that Tracy and Andrea had some comments to that effect. I will turn the table to either Tracy or Andrea if you wanted to talk to that or share your viewpoints with us. No? Okay.
I'll just, the delegation materials aren't required, but if they do want to submit them, they need to meet the deadline. There's a line in there about that the chair has to give express permission to if there's additional written materials. I don't know how people feel about that. It's not something that when I was chair I had to deal with. I didn't have any. I don't remember having delegations really during my tenure. I know certainly Kelly did, and of course recently Margot did. But I don't know if it should fall under the complete purview of the chair to say yay or nay whether those materials should be distributed. Perhaps that's a conversation.
And in fact, what happened at that meeting, which I had the good fortune of chairing, was that we asked people for the materials. And I think that's fairly consistent with what's happened in the past, is if, people put we made it so they didn't have to submit their written materials beforehand. So they're bringing them to the meeting and presenting. And trustees are then saying, hey, can we have a copy of your materials? So it doesn't make much sense the way that this has evolved in practice to me to say may not be distributed to the board at the meeting unless it's supposed to mean something else, i.e. you can't just give people whatever you want kind of thing.
And sorry, if I could just add, I see there's questions, but also the previous delegation that we had, which was on masking, she did give additional information that she shared with everybody, but that was her delegation. But it was beyond what was included in the delegation. But I don't know that was down to me because it was just given, like it was submitted and it's shared with everybody.
Leah, do you have your hand up on this? You do. Okay, Leah, then Kelly.
Okay, so I actually have my hand up on two things. I had my hand up back in the policy piece. So if after this is done, we could go back to the policy. It was just one point of clarification that I was looking for. But my question is just regarding the special delegation nights. I wonder, and I'm thinking back to the PAR, for those.
Yeah. Sorry, before we go on to special delegation nights, does anyone have any comments on this one piece about supplementary materials? Because I know Kelly has her hand up. Does it have to do with the supplementary materials, Kelly? Would you be okay, Leah, if we went to special delegation? Okay, thanks.
when I was chair, we had lots of delegations, not just around the PAR, but other things. And the supplementary materials should be going to all trustees. So I don't think the line should be in there that it's only going to the chair and not, because the information needs to go to all trustees. And I mean, as chair, yes, you may be receiving it, but it's on behalf of all trustees. So either that's what you say, it's sent to the chair on behalf of all trustees with the understanding that it's going to be distributed, or you need to say it goes to all trustees, but then maybe it goes through the director's office.
Okay, so just to wrap up this section, so what we're saying is delegates have the option to provide supplementary materials. And we're still saying that the materials should be provided to the manager by 10 a.m. on Tuesday, assuming that our meetings are always on Wednesday. And what happens if the delegates want to send materials to us on Wednesday, especially if it's for an item that is for decision? Will we accept the materials? Because I think that's what that's alluding to there. It's if additional written materials may not be distributed to the board at the meeting unless approved by the chair. So I'm trying to figure out if we want to accept additional materials the day of, or are we going to implement a deadline?
Go ahead, Kelly. Sorry.
Thank you. So I think that is part of what was left over from the old delegation bylaw. We used to require that people send in their delegations submit the fact they wanted to delegate by Friday prior to the board meeting, and they had to get any materials in by Monday. So I think that's a bit of the overlap. It might have been extended to Tuesday. And that was so that trustees actually had the opportunity to read the material before it came. It also gave the chair the opportunity to read the material. So if there was something there that needed to be potentially reworded, they could get back to the person, because we did have a couple cases where there was some language that was not necessarily appropriate for the board meeting. So I think that was the reasoning behind it. And I mean, the reason we have it before, again, is for the timing, so that we have that opportunity to read the information beforehand. It's just, so, I mean, if you're asking me if it comes on Wednesday, I still think it should have come in on Friday with materials on Monday. So because I found that worked a lot better, especially when the PAR was going on. There were so many delegations. If everybody had registered at the last moment, it would have been a nightmare. So I mean, obviously last time we received the information afterwards. So I mean, I don't know what to say about that, but I want to give you some context to the past.
Okay, I'm going to draw everybody's attention to the time. And Tanya, we are getting there. I know you've got this one other thing, so, but you need direction, and which you're doing exactly what people have asked, which is asking for opinions. And I appreciate that. So, it's a bit squishy though still, isn't it? Leah, is it on this topic?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would like to go back to the policy if we can. But yes, this is absolutely on this thread of conversation. I support, or I have no real opinion, I'm going to say first, whether somebody submits their material in advance of our meeting or after the meeting, after their delegation. So, but my concern is, have we considered how would the chair or the manager determine whether each delegation is bringing new information to our board? Like, what process would you undertake if you didn't have the materials in advance of the meeting to determine whether all the members who are delegating on the same perspective and not bringing new information to our board table so that we could think about it? So that would be my only question about this, is what sort of mechanism is there to ensure that everybody who's delegating on the same topic is bringing new information to us? I have no preference for receiving the material in advance, but I do want to make sure that somebody is given the ability to make that decision prior to coming to our board table.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to interject again. That's coming up next. I wanted, if I can tie up this end about supplementary materials, whether or not we want supplementary materials, if we want to have a hard cutoff on Tuesday at 10 a.m., or if we're willing to accept supplementary materials up to and including and during the board meeting.
So here's my concern. Yes to the materials, but aren't they what is being used by the chair to determine whether each delegation is a unique new information or not? So they have no bearing on that. Absolutely not. So you can evaluate that just upon the one line that they're sent, or the few lines that they send in the application, in the delegation request. Because not having been in the position where I've had to evaluate that, I'm looking to our previous chairs as to how much information they would need to make that decision.
Go ahead, Andrea. How do you use that form?
Well, you know, it was okay. When we had the delegations about the boundary review in Oakville, and also at the most recent delegations about the asbestos, I reminded at the time, and Tracy reminded at the time when she was chairing the meeting, reminded the delegates that to please bring, to make sure you're bringing new information. And I think that our delegates, especially you know, in the most recent round, they were pretty good about it. I think they understood that, you know, there's no point in flogging a dead horse. If we've heard it already, there's no point in saying it again. Other than to just say, I agree with the last delegate, and, you know, moving on from there. It's not, there is no way for a chair to read the minds of the delegates to make sure that they're bringing new information. So all we can do is communicate to them that that's what we're expecting at the table.
So not getting the information in advance, you're kind of expecting the delegates to amend their delegation on the fly if what they were presenting is the same as what they've heard ahead. So my point is this: having the information in hand in advance helps you do that. How important and germane is that action to getting our work done at the board? So I think that's the point that needs to be made.
Kelly?
Further to Leah's point, when we had the delegations for the PAR and other things, while we did ask, there were several people who came up with the same information. So we sent back to them and said, we've already seen this information. There are other groups that are coming forward with that information. We would suggest that maybe you work with them. because we didn't want to hear, and you know how long those nights and days were that we were listening to all those delegations. We didn't to hear the same thing 2 or 3 times. And at that point, they would not have cared, even if the chair said, we don't want to hear, because they felt they were fighting for their schools. So I think it's important to see that, so you can actually say that, I'm sorry, this topic has been covered. If the person gives me permission, I will get you in contact with them so you could work with them. But otherwise, unless you can come with a different perspective, we can't accept your delegation.
And I would just say 2 things. One, we need to keep moving forward here or bring this back in September. And the second thing is that is exactly how Jean and I, in Margot's absence, utilized this form last time around. We saw what people wrote on here and went back to them, and like some of them had written the exact same thing. And the result was that one delegate decided not to move forward. And one other switched up what they were going to say or something, you know? So I think the form, although it is briefer, it can be that same tool to enable that to happen. Tanya, back to you.
Yeah, so, okay. What to do? I'm just going to keep this highlighted, and no resolution has been reached tonight. So I will probably send out an email with maybe proposed wording to accommodate the different perspectives, and we'll see where that takes us. The other section, okay, I think the other sections here are all items that just need to be tweaked insofar as wording and things that have evolved over the last few years as far as what can be included or not. So at this point, Leah, would you like to go back to the policy to ask your question on the policy?
Excuse me, yes, but I have one for this on special delegation nights. So my question was the alignment with our bylaw and the ministry documents on delegations. And specifically, I'm speaking to the PAR policy, and I know the PAR policy, there is a moratorium on it, but there was an misalignment with what was expected on special delegation nights under the PAR and how our bylaws done it. So I just wanted to put a placeholder there for when that PAR comes back into life, that we make sure we are completely aligned with, or we recognize in our bylaws that the ministry delegation requirements supersede our bylaws. So that would be just a placeholder that I would put for that. And if there's no questions to that, I'm happy to just quickly go to the policy. And the question I have was with respect to employees of the board who would like to address matters at our board table. And I was actually asked by a staff member what it means to be related to their employment. And I'll give you the example. I have had a staff member who's interested in delegating our board as a parent. But the uniqueness of it is, as an educator, they obviously will reference that they are an educator, and their learning and their perspective on matters that are affecting children board wide. So I want to ask specifically, can we get some clarity on what this means? Does this mean that no employee can delegate our board, or when employees delegate our board, do we have a framework in which they can speak freely on a matter, perhaps as a parent or as a community member who sees something in our board? So I was looking for a little bit of clarity for that, because of that, the way our wording is related to their employment. What does that mean? Does that mean that if they're just employed, or can they talk as a parent at our board table? I'm wondering if
Andrea?
I think the flavor of this statement within our policy is that it doesn't become a place where staff complain about their work environment or their pay or their benefits, things that are really HR matters. I would think that if the person is a parent and an employee, but if they are working, if they are bringing something that's on our agenda that has to specifically that they stick to their role as a parent, and they have to keep that in mind. I think that that's really what we're saying. Like, this is not a place to negotiate contracts.
No, and I agree with that. This would be a system improvement for students if they were to come to this board. But I'm wondering whether we need to, do we need to consult with our human resources department on this particular element of the policy? Are we in compliance, or is there anything that we are not in compliance by allowing that to happen? So that would just be my my comment. Should we check in with HR, and can we tweak the wording so it's much more clear for employees who do want to come and talk as a parent or as a community member who want to see improvements in our system?
I wonder if that's something that through Jean could be checked on. Curtis, go ahead if you have something. Nope. Okay. You can't hear. We can't hear you, but maybe Margot can. Margot can't even hear you.
No, I don't have magic ears this time. Only Donna. Only Donna.
Okay, Jean's on.
They still can you still not? You can hear Donna? Yes. Okay. See, they heard you that time.
No. Okay, so interesting, but nobody can hear Curtis. I like Leah's suggestion. Okay, excellent. So then I believe, would the action then be through Jean in your role? Yes?
I can take the comments back to our senior management team and admin council to consider what the statement means in terms of matters related to employment, so that our superintendent of human resources can reflect on that and perhaps suggest some wording or suggest where there might be alternative vehicles to address those, where the delineation is between employment matters and matters concerning a parent of a community.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. And so Tanya, that's the action piece there. And then the other action is with you, just with respect to proposing alternative wording for that one section up there. And people have seen the other tweaks that have been made in here, and no other comments have been made at this time. So
yeah, so I just wanted to, if anyone does want to make any additional comments, to feel free to enter the comments. And based on tonight's discussion, this will not come to the board on Wednesday because this is not going to get done by Friday. So this will come to you in September for final review and hopefully approval. So thanks.
Thank you for moving this one forward as well. Moving the needle, definitely. Okay, so subcommittees. Under 3.6, we're at 3.6.1, trustee promotion and onboarding. Is there anything from that group? Yep, go ahead.
Just a quick verbal that if you go onto the trustees page on the website, you can see there's a couple of buttons on the top that lead to information about the role of the trustee and the frequently asked questions, and also the information from the Google Classroom for the new trustees program has been distributed to the first term trustees for comment. I'm, when you can get back to me or, give feedback, that would be great. I know it's kind of a rough time right now, and we still have some time to do work. So just looking for some feedback on what's there and perhaps what's missing. So that's it.
Thank you. And naming and renaming. What's the scoop?
We had our first meeting, and thank you to those who sent me information they wanted to be included. We have 2 more meetings set up before the end of the school year, but we've started to go through the criteria. We've agreed on some things and agreed to disagree on some others that we will park until maybe closer to the end. And it's going to be probably a work in progress.
Okay, do you have a next meeting scheduled or?
Yes, we have 2 more scheduled before the end of the school year.
Okay, well, thank you. And if there's anything that the group needs input from the broader group, I'm imagining you can email or something over the summertime. Awesome. Thanks for taking that on, Kelly and team. Okay, we are now moving on to other business. And we have one item, 3.7.1, Committee of the Whole Agenda Creation Process. And that's over to Jean.
Thank you, Vice Chair. This is just an update for all the trustees. So we were transitioning the agenda creation process so that my role can provide more support to the Vice Chair in the agenda creation process for Committee of the Whole. So moving forward, it will look a little bit like the board agenda creation process, where I'll reach out to trustees and staff to collect the agenda items. And following that, I'll draft the agenda for the Vice Chair's consideration and final approval. We'll continue to use the Committee of the Whole folders. That seems to work for everyone unless I hear from you otherwise. And following that, I'll aim to get the materials on our public website for the Committee of the Whole agenda and agenda items. And so that's just an update for everybody about what the go forward approach for Committee of the Whole agenda creation will look like. So you may hear from me more often is the bottom line.
Heather.
Thank you. May I ask you, Tracy, how you feel about this since you've been so intricately involved with the process the whole time? How do you feel?
Hey, thank you for asking. I feel great. I'm grateful that Jean is in this role and taking a bigger or more active piece. The pieces that I hope have evolved over the last bunch of years are a more collaborative approach in terms of identifying what the topics are, the timing associated with those topics, and for people who are bringing them forward to feel empowered to speak and lead that session and so on. And all of that stuff is just going to happen in a more efficient way through Jean as she's looking at both the board and this agenda package. So I think it will be great. And it also sets up, thinking in the big picture. We are here in these roles now, and whoever's in this role the next time around, I think it will be just eminently very, very great, helpful, assistive, collaborative. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. It's like crowdsourcing this agenda, which is really kind of cool. So because it reflects hopefully what you want on the agenda. And that will continue. Okay, we do have, so it's 9:35. And we're on to 4.0, OPSPA resolutions from other boards. And that's over to Andrea, I believe, and perhaps Donna as well.
I don't believe I sent out a form asking for people's feedback, and I don't believe I've seen any come in. So that's just, I was just requesting if anybody had any questions you want me to bring forward as these items come to the table. But so far, nothing. I will keep my eyes open. And I'm heading for Ottawa tomorrow. I'm assuming Donna is there already, and Jean is probably on the road as well. And I know Margot and Tanya are also heading up there. So it's there's going to be 5 of us up there in Ottawa, which is, I think, a great turnout for the AGM this year. So hope to represent you well.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Andrea, the feedback that you were asking for, that was the one where there were a few boards that had put forward a motion, and then OPSPA came back and made some comments, right?
Yeah, and we still need to, as a board of directors, we need to vote on those motions. So the executive made comments at the bottom, just so that the board of directors know sort of that side of things, but it really comes down to our vote.
So I read the document and I agree with the comments made. So how would you like me to reflect that in your survey?
If you'd like, you can, for each of the questions, say, I agree, or I'd like this to move forward, or something along those lines, or I agree with the comments from the Executive Council.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And I was similar to Tanya. I know there was one or more in there that seemed a bit out of the scope, and Executive Council pointed that out. So for me, no comment means I agree with what's happening. So
I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
All righty. Perfection. And I have just looked, and there are no. Okay, well, 6.0 is public questions. There aren't any. So we'll do 5.0 then. Trustee questions and comments. Are there any of those? Or committee of the whole? Okay, seeing none, I'll just let you know we have agenda setting this week. And so if there's anything that people are thinking about that will be coming forward, please let us know, including Jean, and then we can move forward. It's hard to believe, but this is our last planned board meeting of the school year. And of course, we have some gigantic items for consideration And Margot, I think just in terms of a heads up, we are going to be having the hybrid model. So some people will be able to be in the boardroom as you wish.
Yes, and again, sorry, also Tracy, to add on to that, I know there, Curtis, are you still there somewhere? I don't see you.
He's here.
Yes, I'm here.
And we can hear you.
Oh my God.
We can hear you. Because I know there was some discussion about dinner. Yes, he's nodding and saying, yes, he's going to buy us all dinner.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
incentive to come.
Yes, I think it would be great if we could all come out next week. I'm going to bring out as many of the staff as possible so we could all be together. That would be great as a final meeting.
Awesome. Thank you, Curtis.
And still the hybrid piece will be available if, should people be on travel or have other sorts of considerations. So, alrighty, seeing no other questions and comments at 9:40, would somebody like to make a motion to, thanks, Donna. All right, is there any discussion, any objection to adjourning the meeting? Seeing none.